Hey guys, Loman02, currently doing a Canadian Highlander deck tech, some theory of play, and then some gameplay with the deck that you have in front of you. So if you're not familiar with Canadian Highlander is a 100-card singleton or unified format. It contains only single copies of each card. It is vintage ban list legal, so legality. So basically anything that's not allowed vintage is not allowed in this format. Um, and in addition, the most powerful cards throughout Magic's history are pointed such that you may have up to 10 points, and each of the most powerful cards have varied amounts of points. So that all said, if the Canadian Highlander format is not a format that interests you, sorry, that's what we got today. And if you'd like to, or you'd rather see gameplay as opposed to seeing me kind of break apart this mid-range deck that you have in front of you, then please jump down to the comments section, and you can find timestamps for all of the gameplay that I'm going to have available. So this deck that you have in front of you is Esper Deathblade. It has a little bit of heritage in Legacy, originally Cawblade. In standard at one point in time, and now relatively soon to be modern because Stoneforge Mystic has recently been unbanned due to BNR release, I believe, this Monday. Um, so Stoneforge Mystic is actually one of the pointed cards in this deck, and kind of the genesis of why I wanted to build this deck. There are other Stoneforge Mystic decks. Jeskai Midrange comes to mind, but I feel like Jeskai Midrange has been pretty well explored, and I've been trying to kind of get an Esper Midrange deck, or Esper Deathblade as I've called this one, as correct as I can get it. And I don't know if this is exactly the best build of it. I don't know if there is a best build of any one given deck because I think it varies so much from metagame to metagame on what is the best, and how you template that deck to beat what you expect to see. But this deck is specifically set up and kind of designed to beat up or to fight in more of a fair metagame. It still does have some tools, mostly in discard, to fight in an unfair metagame. But just to kind of give you a heads up on how I've templated this deck, I've templated to beat up on other creature value-based decks, aggro decks, stuff like that. So a lot of react along a curve, a lot of removal. More removal than you tend to see in decks that you want to have tuned to beat up on like combo decks. So, my points of the deck. Stoneforge Mystic is 1 point in this format. One of my 2-point cards is Umezawa's Jit. It's actually the second most highly pointed card in this deck. And then beyond that, you have Mind Twist, 1-point card right here. Target player discards X cards at random. One of my 3-pointers, Demonic Tutor. Basically just finds anything in the deck. It's a pretty fair Demonic Tutor in this list, and it's not impossible that it could just be a Mox. Maybe a Soul Ring, probably a Mox. Probably a Mox Sapphire would make the most sense. Spellseeker, another 1-pointer right here, can find Demonic Tutor, can find Tainted Pact, can find any of our removal or discard, counter spells. You name it. Finds pretty much a lot of things in the deck. Not the most unfair Spellseeker because I'm not an Ancestral Recall deck. That is a 7-point card. I just didn't have the points for it. I don't think it per se benefited this deck as much as having a little bit of a wider array of points. And if you go with Ancestral Recall, you can only have Stoneforge Mystic plus Umezawa's Jit. If you want to run Jit and Stoneforge, I tend to like running both those because I think when you don't have Jit with Stoneforge, it's still very playable, but I think it loses out on a little bit of power. And then my remaining points consist of Dig Through Time right here, just a very powerful card drawing spell, and I think definitely worthy of playing if you have a 1-point slot and you're playing blue. Treasure Cruise also very powerful, but I think Dig Through Time tends to be a little bit more powerful in this format. Just finds you specifically what you need. So if you have a choice between one or the other, you tend to run this one. And then, I actually have one more point, and it is True Name Nemesis. This card is just very hard to interact with and just very bomby. One of the things you'll kind of find in this deck is, as I went through, and honestly, I will be the first to admit that I tend to be the most uncomfortable building mid-range decks, and I think, enjoy to some extent the gameplay a little bit less than a lot of other decks, because at the end of the day, what I think you have to do is just, build by this philosophy of all killer, no filler. There is some tech to it, but for the most part, you just want to have, like, the top 40% of each domain. So, like, when I say that, I mean, like, the top 40% discard, the top 40% counter spells, the top 40% planeswalkers, the top 40% creature. You want to have, like, the top end creature. So there's a range of cards that are playable in Canadian Highlander, right? And if you're on, like, Draw Go, like, Prohibit is probably a very playable card at 2 mana. Like, if you're on a Seinfeld, I think is what they call it in this format. Mono blue control, basically. But Prohibit's not really a card I tend to want to run in this deck. One of the notables that you'll see is missing just from my counter magic pile right here with this 13 is Miscalc. Miscalc tends to be a card that a lot of decks will play because it's kind of considered to be in like the top tier, or at least probably tier 1 of counter magic. But I don't really think it scales that well in the long game when you'd rather just draw a bomb or draw a hard counter spell. And some folks may say Memory Lapse is not as good a counterspell. I think Memory Lapse tends to be better in a deck like this, where it's just like you're really using them for tempo to like kind of maintain board advantage with your powerful cards that you have. So the reason I tend to be uncomfortable with these decks is that there's I'm not gonna say it's thoughtless. It's definitely not thoughtless, but like you're basically not really looking to maximize on synergy. You're looking to maximize on independent card power and quality. So you kind of see that as we go through. Like a lot of my threats tend to either be resilient through what kind of permanent type they are, i.e. Bitter Blossom, have really egregious hosing effects on them, and just be like flash, instant speed, like very flexible cards like Aven Mind Sensor, or just the most powerful. Like Snapcaster is just probably one of the best 2-drops. Dark Confidant, very very powerful. Deathrite Shaman, I can run a mana dork in my my mid-range deck, in my non-green mid-range deck, which is pretty sick. Am I getting full value out of this card? No, but it's a 1-mana 1/2 that can eventually kill my opponent via life loss, which is not irrelevant because damage sometimes can be prevented. And also just ramps me in a deck that's running, I believe, 10 fetch lands. And typically speaking, other folks should be running fetch lands as well. So kind of as you go through, like that's kind of the mantra of this deck, or kind of like how I went about attacking this deck. I think the couple times I've built it, I've either ended up like too hateberry or too controlling. So like in the sideboard, I have cards like Camball, Lavinia, and like I oftentimes, come on, Moto, I oftentimes found that like they just didn't cut it. Like one, they're both legends, so they get flipped by Caracas, which is a problem in the format, and two, like. They're really good in the right. Their ceiling is really high. Like if you're playing in Storm, like these cards just pretty much end the game on the spot. They're very very hard to beat for that deck, or like High Tide or something. If they resolve, it's really tough for them to beat them. But that's only one matchup. It's only a subset of matchups, and because like I kind of said, like the metagame that I've been playing in recently, and like mostly on Moto is generally fair. Like there's not a ton of like really degenerate combo decks that you have to worry about. I think in general you're just better off playing like good cards that maybe aren't as taxy as these cards are right here, but in general just stand alone as really good threats that either end the game fast or make it very hard for your opponent to win. And or come with cards stapled to them, basically just replace themselves. So yeah, that's kind of the build philosophy going into it. The mana base, over here, it's not exceedingly sophisticated. These are just all the fetchable lands. I am running a pretty significant basic land count. 2 islands, 1 snow, 1 basic. Well, I guess both basics, but 1 snow, 1 non-snow, 1 snow swamp, 1 regular swamp, and then 1 plains. The mana distribution in this deck is mostly blue, but when it comes to white and black, it's fairly even. Like you can actually go on Moto and actually see like what your mana distributions are if this thing doesn't freeze up and die on me. But typically speaking, you're going to have like one heavier color in these decks. This is definitely a very solid Esper deck. Like, if you look at like blue, white, splash, black, like it's very minimal black, and like some decks are really 2 colors splashing a color. This is very heavily Esper. Like as you look at it, like it's resoundingly blue, but the 2 secondary colors are very close to each other, which means that I think in general, like you need to be pretty discriminating, like especially if you're going to run Tainted Pact. You have to be very dense in dual lands to help support that. And I do think because of a lot of the double requirements, like you even want to go as deep as filter lands. So as you kind of jump into the mana base, like this is a deck that like I am actually a big proponent of running all 3 of the filter lands in. We've got stuff like Hymn to Turek, we've got stuff like Palace Jailer, Gideon, Jace, Cryptic Command is in this deck. So like Liliana at 3, Gideon of the Trials at 3, Dig Through Time, some of the counter magic. So there's a lot of double requirements in the deck. As much as possible, I try to get color requirements like Vindicate here, which has just 2 separate colors, or Gerard's Verdict, or Scarab God, because they tend to be easier to cast. In any mid-range deck. But I think when you start getting into a mid-range deck where like you really want to like eke every bit as much as you can out of power in your cards, you're going to start tending to run more double mana or double casting cost cards, so like BB, white, blue cards. And then you kind of run into this problem, like, do I want to one be able to either cast my Logic Knot on turn 2, or I want to be able to cast my Hymn to Turek on turn 2. So these lands right here, I think, definitely help out a significant bit with that. When you're playing a deck like this, where power has kind of been chosen over synergy, and you have to eschew to some extent, the selection of your cards based on mana cost, or not mana cost, but the type of mana to actually cast your spells. This allows you to kind of eschew some of that. You also have like the check lands and then the fast lands right here, all of them. I do also have Underground River, nice white border there, and a Darkheart Waste to help fix. And then over here you have all of the fetch lands. I'm running, all 9 of the old school fetch lands, and then the Prismatic Vista, because I am running the 5x basic land suite inside the deck. As far as specialty lands or utility lands, I have Karakas and Wasteland in this deck. Karakas just because it's horrendously OP. This card tends to get played in decks that aren't even running white, or it can. I don't know if I always am a proponent of that, but it's very powerful. Wasteland, yep. Alright, Celestial Colonnade and Creeping Tar Pit. These are probably the 2 best creature lands. I don't know if they're the best. I mean, like, Treetop Village is not bad. In the right deck, Mishra's Factory, Mishra's and Mutavault are very good, but I think these are probably the 2 best. Like, Creeping Tar Pit just is a great Planeswalker killer. It's good for finishing out a game. Celestial Colonnade, same thing. It flies, it's evasive, it also has Vigilance. It's a lot to activate, but it does a big old swath of damage, and it can kind of operate as a creature and or a land, which is really nice because, I mean, we're running a 36-land deck, which, generally speaking is going to mean we're pretty solidly mid-range, probably a little bit more on the controlling end of it. But sometimes, they just kill all your bombs, and, like, you need a way to finish the game off, and these cards are really good at that. And when you get to the long game, like, it's not infeasible for you to like actually lock up a sword or a jit to one of these cards to actually keep on getting value off of these equipment that are inside the list. So, finishing up with that, like, I'm going to kind of review the piles here. So, like, the first pile that I'm going to kind of cover here, it's just next to the lands that we just covered, is the card draw. So, I've kind of trimmed this down. I'm not sure if this is exactly the card draw I want to or have in the deck. I may want to even trim Serum Visions out of the list, but Brainstorm, Ponder, and Preordain I think are pretty universally accepted as like the best. Well, Ancestral Vision or Ancestral Recall is the best card draw, but that's a pointed card, and I'm not able to run it in the deck without doing significant changes to it. But I think these, in regards to unpointed card draw in the format, are pretty universally accepted as being the best. Brainstorm is probably the most powerful of them, especially when you're running 10 fetch lands in a deck, and have additional shuffle effects like Stoneforge Mystic, Demonic Tutor, Spellseeker, etc. Ponder and Preordain, actually, it really vacillates between which of these is more relevant depending on the game state. If you're actually looking for like a way to win or a way to not lose, like Ponder's probably better in a pinch. But Preordain, like, in the open is probably a little more, generally speaking, going to be more powerful because it helps set up your turns a little better. It's generally really rare that, like, you actually ponder and, like, see all stuff that you want. Sometimes it happens, though. Sometimes there's only 1 or 2 things you want, and then you combine it with a fetch land and get rid of the third thing you don't want. Serum Vision is kind of the same thing. Like, Serum Visions, I think, is one of those cards that, like, is pretty decent as a turn 1 play, maybe even turn 2 or turn 3. But drawing this late's kind of rough because you're not really worried about setting up your top deck a turn from now. You're worried about, like, not losing the game right now. So I'm not convinced it maybe couldn't be an opt, or maybe it just could get cut entirely. And I could play another threat, or, another kill spell or something like that inside the deck. And even Ancestral Vision. Ancestral Vision's really slow. I don't know if it's getting too old for the format or not, but it's very powerful. Like, when you have this in your openers, it tends to help you win games if you don't die before it comes off the stack. This thing, it comes out of exile, comes out of suspend zone, or comes off of being suspended, and you get to draw 3 cards. Like, typically speaking, especially based on the card quality of this deck, like, you're generally going to win if you get to play the game that long. Now, if you don't, well, you're probably going to lose. But, it's kind of a risk you run when you're running a card like this. And Ancestral Vision is really funny to me because it's, unless you're like cascading into it, like the old waterfall style combos, like oftentimes it's kind of an odd card because like it's so heavily invested. Oftentimes it feels like you're gonna fight like the next 4 turns with like your arm behind your back. So in Control, it tends to be kind of challenging to actually stay alive long enough when you do have the Ancestral Vision openers. But in a deck like this, I think it's actually more well suited to helping you out, because like your deck is really designed to kind of fight along a range of almost anything. Like you have some game against the unfair decks, you have some game against the fair decks. You have ways to accrue value and just kind of grind cards. But in general, like you can either choose to be the deck that needs to be answered or the deck that answers stuff. So I think Ancestral Vision kind of tends to be better in a deck like this, because you're not entirely like just dependent on trying to stay alive long enough for it to come off. Like your cards will tend to do things in the interim, and they're of high enough quality that like being down a card is not as big a deal. Like you're not trying to prohibit their next play, is I guess what I mean. Your cards don't vacillate so wildly in value that like you're a Latinam's Legacy deck where like you just need to get rid of some crappy cards. Now there are still cards that like at times like counter spells are not going to be that relevant if your opponent has like a Cavern of Souls out or something like that, a tribal deck. Your removal may be not very worthwhile if your opponent's playing stuff like Throne the Last Roll. But, in general, like the card quality is generally high enough that like being down a card for the first 4 turns is not a big deal. And when you draw 3, like those 3 cards are all going to be pretty good, is kind of the hope with how it works. Then Dig Through Time, point a card, just finds anything. I'm not, convinced that like maybe this couldn't be a deck that just runs Treasure Cruise over Dig Through Time. But I feel like that's probably still wrong. Like, Dig Through Time is just so powerful. I mean, this is double impulse, and that's just a lot. It's a lot of card. You'll note I'm actually not playing Impulse. I do love that card, but I think, honestly, Impulse is probably more well-suited to control decks than it is to mid-range decks. I mean, it's very, very powerful. Or you have to like really be exploiting a synergy with it, like be playing Saheeli or like Young Pyromancer, which we're not in the color for Young Pyromancer. Maybe Murmuring Mystic, but like those, Murmuring Mystic's not really a mid-range card. Saheeli could possibly be. I don't really know. I think she's a good card, but I think to power her up completely, like you really want to have her in not a mid-range deck. I don't think she's that good on her own, I guess is my thing. But anyways, Dig Through Time is my last draw card here. As you can see, not a lot of draw cards. So, a lot of the blue decks that I cover tend to be what I would call like a Xerox-style deck. This is really not a Xerox-style deck. Xerox-style decks tend to have like 10, at least the 100-card singleton Xerox decks, tend to have like 10 to 15 like cards that replace themselves, draw something, select, give you selection capability, are just flexible kind of draw. Basically just control over variance. But I don't think, in mid-range decks, like, you don't need as much of that because like I was saying, like, your cards are all of such high quality that, like, having command over variance is kind of silly because you can just, you're going to just draw good stuff. Gideon of the Trials is just a good card. Like, why is this a good card in this format? Well, because it stops Storm from killing you. It stops unfair combo decks that, can't deal with Gideon from killing you. It's also a great threat. It's also decent in fair matchups because it can, 1, attack, and 2, it can stop their best thing from attacking you or killing it. Like, it just does a little bit of everything. That's why it's a powerful card in the format, right? It just does a little bit in all the matchups. And, when you run more cards like Portents, like Ops, you tend to run those cards in decks that are higher synergy and or higher setup. And I think in an archetype like mid-range, like you don't generally need as much setup. Your cards should all just do their job very well. They should be the best at what they do. Alright, so this next pile is the Planeswalker pile. A lot of these can be treated as creatures. I think generally a hallmark of like mid-range decks, if you just like look at the breakdown of like lands, creatures, other, it tends to be like, lands 36, like 35 to 36, and then creature count 20, like 20 is generally like 20 to 24. I've seen like the Abzan list run up to like, like 30, 33, 34. Like, there's probably some really aggressive builds that go even up to 40. But generally speaking, like the blue-based mid-range decks are going to have, somewhere in the ballpark of 20 creatures. I think you can go plus or minus on it, and this list is obviously minus, but I'm running some threats in the deck that are just not creatures, so the 18 count's probably a little bit low for what in the deck actually operates as a creature. Gideon is one such card that does that. Both Gideons are. So, if you want to count them as creatures, which I think you pretty reliably can, like we're at 20 creatures as well. Next up you have Liliana, the Last Hope. This card kind of, again, just does it all. Well, it doesn't really work as well against combo, right? It doesn't really do much against combo. But in the fair matchups, which, as I said, this deck, I kind of built just, with with fair metagame in mind, this card just does a ton. It's a threat for starters. So against control, this thing is just basically a ticking time bomb. Against other mid-range decks or against aggressive decks, it can remove their mana dorks, can remove their threats. If they kill your threat, you can get it back. It's just a lot. And if it ever ultimates, you probably win the game unless they can kill you in the next turn or two. Teferi, Time Reveler, this card, again, probably a top-tier Planeswalker. This card is great, guys. It's just so good. You put it into play with 3-mana Planeswalkers for starters are just busted. Like, they're just very good. They're hard to deal with. This one right here, makes it so that it's really difficult for your opponent to interact with you. And generally speaking, the play pattern in this deck is you play this thing, you bounce whatever they played on turn 2, give them the turn back, they probably replay it, you kill it, and then you just keep ticking this thing up. And maybe it dies, maybe it doesn't, but at a minimum, it generally replaces itself. It's going to buy you some time so you can get into your big bombs like Scarab God, like Monastery Mentor, Hostage Taker, or whatever, and just beat the living crap out of them. I mean, this is probably not the best Teferi deck. The best Teferi deck's probably like blue, white, splash, black. Like more of a control build. But this deck definitely still gets a significant bit of value off Teferi as well. Kaya Orzhov Usurper. So I'm testing this card out right now. Besides being like a pretty card, I like the look of these full art ones. The card kind of has an interesting effect. It basically attacks graveyards, gains you life, which is actually pretty sweet. It also can exile permanents, small permanents. So like mana vaults, crypts, rings. This thing can get, which is actually pretty relevant because the medium decks are in a pretty good spot right now. Like I think until Crypt and Ring go up by a point, we're going to keep on seeing the medium style decks kind of thrive pretty well because I think they're probably free rolling about 2 points somewhere in their list. And if you're not familiar with like what I mean when I say the medium builds, like basically red deck wins. Think red deck wins with more 3s, 4s, and 5 drops, and Mana Vault, Mox, Crypt, and Soul Ring, plus Ancient Tomb and City of Traders and some other fast mana, plus a bunch of Eldrazi and a bunch of Hasty Dragons. Like that's kind of what you got. So I think Kaya is in an interesting spot because Kaya can deal with the artifact mana out of those style of decks, although the rest of her is not that great against them. She can also deal with like cards like Scavenging Ooze, where you just get rid of nonsense before it becomes a problem. Kind of stops Delve decks from actually getting Delve value, stops Deathrite Shaman from getting some value. Obviously, like Deathrite and Scavenging Ooze can respond to this thing, but basically you just attrit down their yard. So if they're using it as a resource, then they're not anymore. Additionally, she's quite good against Storm. Like Storm is a graveyard-based deck. It needs resources in the graveyard to set up an Ill-Gotten Gains loop and or a Yawgmoth's Will, big Yawgmoth's Will, to actually get the Storm count it needs to actually win. Now it can do it without using the graveyard, but it's really tough. And this card kind of screws with that. And at the end of the day, it's just a win con. So I'm testing this card out. I'm not really going to say it's like a best card that like this deck should be playing, but like I think it does enough in enough matchups that it generally deems answering. And I want to try it out. Next card I got is Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. This card is a bomb. Top tier Planeswalker. Just kills folks dead. Is basically a 7-power attacker. The turn split across 2 bodies. The turn after it comes into play. Can Anthem, rarely will in this deck, and can just keep on making Knight Ally tokens. This card just wins games. Kaya Ghost Assassin. So I'm trying this card out too. Like I played this card in Mardu, and I kind of want to try it in this deck. So like I'm kind of in a weird spot with this deck, right? Like I've really been testing out a lot of different stuff with it because I kind of want to figure out what it is best at. So the reason I chose this card and like a card like the other Kaya. This card specifically is because it attacks the hand zone. Being able to make an opponent discard and then you draw a card is actually pretty powerful. Like it's a lot more powerful, I think, than you'd give credit for initially seeing it. And I also have a lot of discard in this deck, so I really wanted to interact with the hand zone because I think that's one of the distinguishing things that like this deck, Esper specifically, can do over Jeskai. Jeskai really doesn't interact all that well with the hand zone. I mean, they've got like Vendilion Click, but otherwise they're basically just like interacting with the stack, so countering spells as they hit the stack. There's pluses and minuses to both. Obviously being able to interact with the hand zone tends to be worse against, like the aggressive decks because they're just going to play their hand short. So you're going to be lucky if you get 1 to 2 discard spells off. But against decks that rely on density, and have to build up density, discard is a lot more powerful, I tend to think. They can tend to be able to overwhelm you. So what I mean by that is you're playing against a storm deck, I tend to think you're possibly better off running a deck like this than you are Jeskai, because they're going to need to build up a density of cards in their hand, and it's going to need to be the right cards to actually go off on turn 3 to turn 5 and actually win the game. And, if you're able to kind of pick that apart with stuff like, Kaya Ghost Assassin, Duress, Inquisition Thoughtseize, Gerard's Verdict, Him, Collective Brutality, and Mind Twist, you can really kind of bust up their flow. So I think there's pluses and minuses to prioritizing stack interaction and to prioritizing hand zone interaction. The downside, the floor on hand zone interaction is that if they're hellbent, it's really bad to top deck. So it's a balancing act, right? Once someone's hellbent, it's better to draw counter magic than it is to hand attack, because they're probably not going to try to build their hand zone back up. That said, you can still plus, or you can still -2 Kaya, and you get to draw a card. They won't discard a card, but you'll draw a card. The other cool thing about Kaya is she doesn't actually have a plus ability, but she does reset herself at 5. So, if you get to a point where, you have kind of controlled the board and you get this thing down, it tends to be able to run away with the game. I've actually also used her just to remove an attacker, or to remove an attacker that would have killed me, or at least put me on a faster clock than I wanted to be on. And it was actually pretty good. I was pretty happy with it. The life loss and gain is not bad either. This deck is a little more on the controlling end of mid-range, or at least the matchups I've played it in, I've tended to have to assume a control role. And the life gain is not bad either. So I've actually been pretty happy with her, but I've only played her in 1 game so far with this deck, and she was fine. Jason Mind Sculptor, top tier. This card is just a bomb. Yeah. There doesn't need to be much said about Jason Mind Sculptor. Probably one of the best probably the best Planeswalker ever printed. In this format, I would say Lily's probably a close second. She's very good too. This card is just nuts. This card is also nuts. The best Planeswalkers in this deck are definitely Gideon, Jace, Lily, and Teferi. Followed up probably by this Kaya and the Gideon, and then Kaya Orzhov Usurper. The verdict's still out on her. I'm just testing her out. Next pile we have here is the counter magic. So all of the best counter magic, or at least what I deem to be the best counter magic for this deck. Force of Negation. Yep, it's a fast format. You just kind of want to have effects like this. Daze. Yep, this is a deck that's playing It's playing a 5. Actually, 2 5-drops. It's got this plus the Batter Skull, but Batter Skull is more so intended to be a 2-drop off of Stoneforge Mystic. So Daze a little bit. I have more scruples with Daze, because oftentimes, a deck like this is going to want to develop its mana. But I think Daze is just powerful enough, and we're not really a control deck, so we're not just going to lose the game if we have to put a land back in hand early. But ideally, you're using this in the mid game after to protect a proactive game plan that you've already kind of started enacting. Force of Will, yep, just great. Spell Pierce, yep, just very efficient, does a good job. Spell Snare, yep, very powerful. Mana Leak. Memory Lapse is an interesting one. So I'm playing Memory Lapse over Miscalc. I actually think Memory Lapse in a more proactive deck, it tends to be better than Miscalc. Miscalc does not scale as well. So Memory Lapse is great from the standpoint that if you have a position of board parity or advantage, I think it tends to be better than Miscalc because it scales better. I.e., if you're able to establish kind of dominance on the board, or at least a position of parity, Memory Lapse is fine. It's better if you have good board position and you're kind of winning on board. Especially if they play out something that you don't think is that relevant, and it's good to have them redraw that irrelevant thing on the following turn. Whereas Miscalc, well, it does cycle in the long game, which is not bad. I don't tend to think is as powerful because it's just not a hard counter. You can't just counter anything. Memory Lapse puts it back on top, no doubt. It's not great, but I mean it's still card parity. It's still a good 1-for-1 answer, and it just does answer it. Miscalc does not answer some things in a long game, and well, you may be able to draw something different with it that's relevant. You also may just draw land if you cycle it off. So I feel like Memory Lapse does a better job in a deck that wants to have the ability to be more proactive, which I think this deck does, or at least offers the flexibility of being more proactive. Remand, yep, just very good proactive. It's actually a good proactive counter. I really enjoy Remand. I think it's a great in a more proactive mid-rangey deck. Counterspell, yep, just OG. Logic Knot, yep, very good card. Yeah, not a ton of delve in this deck, so I think we're fine with it. Like Dig Through Time and Logic Knot are the only delve cards I'm running in the deck, so I think they're just fine. Spell Queller, yeah, this card I think when you're playing white and blue tends to be a card you want to include. This actually does not counter whatever it's countering, quote unquote. It actually exiles it, so you can actually even get like some of the smaller, low end, uncounterable spells. To include Thrun, which is kind of a cool interaction. This card is always a little more dicey because you never know when they're going to remove it, and they're just going to randomly get whatever's underneath it. Although sometimes it's not going to be something that's going to be relevant. Like if you use Spellqueller to counter a counter spell, it tends to be pretty nice. Or like Hand Attack, you can like eventually lose it when Hand Attack's not as relevant. So I think this card is just good enough. I mean, it's a flash creature that's a 2/3 flyer for 3, which is still good. Cryptic Command, yeah, this card is awesome. Like Cryptic Command's a beast. I really enjoy this card a lot more in proactive decks like this. This card, don't get me wrong, it's very good in control too. Like it's very good in any deck that can run it. But when you're able to actually maximize all modes, like tapping your opponent's creatures with this card is very powerful in a deck that actually is going to look to win through the combat step with its creatures. So I've been pretty happy with this card so far. Mystic Confluence, this card is just very powerful. It kind of does a little bit of everything. Again, I almost like this card better in a deck like this where, bouncing stuff to set up a lethal attack or, prevent yourself from dying into a lethal attack on the following turn is very powerful. And then the other half of it is it's 3 mana leak stapled together or, an Ancestral Recall for 5 mana, which Ancestral Recall is a good enough card that even when you're turning this card into Jace's Ingenuity, I think it's still just fine. It's fine. If there's nothing else going on and that's what you do with it, like I think it's good. Alright, so the Tutoring Pile. Spellseeker, one of my other points, just basically finds whatever you need in the deck, whatever low end you need. Actually, it's really whatever you need because you can find Demonic Tutor with it, and then find whatever you need if you really want to go like on a deep line to find a specific card. But yeah, I think this card is good enough to play in this deck. I mean, this is definitely not a Merchant Scroll deck because I don't have enough blue instants that I really want to have to spend that much mana to go find. Whereas Spellseeker can be used in a proactive measure for proactive measures to go find Demonic Tutor and find a threat, or Tainted Pact to find a threat, or it can be used to find answer cards. Like it can be used to find like a Mind Twist just to get rid of their entire hand and get ahead on resources, or a Gerard's Verdict or a Thoughtseize. Maybe you just want Thoughtseize to protect whatever threat you intend on playing, or Duress to protect whatever threat you intend on playing from counter magic. Or it can get counter magic too. It can get a reactive card as well. Or maybe just it gets Ancestral Vision to set up for a long game play. That's probably not going to be a common play with it. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possible that like you just find like a Ponder or Preordain or Brainstorm either. They're all very powerful cantrips, and maybe you just want to redraw. The other cool thing about Spellseeker over something like Merchant Scroll or like a different tutor effect or a different effect we could put in the deck is that it carries equipment just fine. We are a little bit low on bodies, being at 18. Some of our bodies are not consistently bodies, so like Creeping Tar Pit, Celestial Colonnade, and then these walkers are not consistently bodies. I guess Gideon Ally of Stickar kind of is because it makes a 2/2. But you definitely want to have the right density of bodies just to carry stuff, to carry your equipment over the finish line, because you are running 3 pieces of it, and at least 2 of them want to be locked up to something. Demonic Tutor, yep, just a really powerful card. Like I said, this could possibly be like a Mox Sapphire. I don't think it would be horrible in the deck. But I do kind of like the flexibility that Demonic Tutor gives you, because we're a mid-range deck. Like we're gonna either find ourselves fulfilling the aggressive role or the control role, and have to have the flexibility to switch between both. And I think Mox does that a little less good than Demonic Tutor does. Demonic Tutor just kind of gives you a little more range. I've cast Demonic Tutor a couple times. Generally, it's either going to find a threat or it's going to find an answer. The most common answers I tend to find are like Toxic Deluge is a pretty common one. I think I found Anguish Unmaking or Vindicate with it as well, just to deal with a walker. And then I've used it to find like a bomb, like just find Scarab God and set up a good value win on board. Tainted Pact. This deck is running 5 basics, but they are snow. They are split between snow and regular basic. For the 2 that I have doubles of, the Islands and the Swamps, so this can find whatever you want to find in the deck, obviously at the expense of exiling other cards. But because we're a good stuff strategy, It tends to be just fine because you're going to find more bombs in your deck. You're probably going to have more counter spells. You're probably going to have more hand attack. You're probably going to have more lands and more planeswalkers left. So, if you have to exile 40 cards, it's really not a huge deal. The only time it would become a big deal is if you're trying to find something really specific like Toxic Deluge, which is like, the one way that we really have of Wrath of Godding the board. I guess we have a couple ways to do it. I mean, you have Toxic Deluge to do like a very massive board, like, talking like 10 elves, 20 elves on the board or something like that. You're probably already dead if that's the case, but like if they have like 6 to 8 creatures, it's going to be pretty tough outside of Toxic Deluge to answer it. But the other way you do have is Cryptic Command. Cryptic Command, if you have some board, presence and it's enough to actually kill them, then Cryptic Command is basically a Wrath of God 2, because you just tap their stuff down, draw a card, or tap their stuff down, bounce something if they have like a moat in play, and then attack them for lethal on the following turn, which is pretty good. And Mystic Confluence can kind of do a verisimilitude of like, Toxic Deluge and Cryptic Command 2 by bouncing 3 things. What is that card called? Baral's Expertise or something like that. You can just use that mode of it to bounce a bunch of stuff, which is fine. Basically, the flexibility of this card is just what's amazing on it. This Confluence, but yeah. So, anyways, Tainted Pact, is pretty fine to exile a bunch of your deck, unless you're really looking for something specific like T-Del or something like that. All right. So the next pile you have here is kind of the removal pile. You have one piece of mass removal, which is Toxic Deluge. You have Anguished Unmaking, which I'm not convinced couldn't be changed out for a card like Esper Charm, possibly in a different metagame. But I have a lot of hand attack, and Esper Charm. Let me pull it up real fast if you're not familiar with it. It's actually in the maybe board right now. So Esper Charm, here you are. This card's pretty powerful, so it's 1 Esper mana, instant, destroy target enchantment, which is kind of nice against like Blood Moons, Corsair Crucifixes, stuff like that. Draw 2 cards, or target player discards 2 cards. Instant speed discard is very powerful. The fact that you can fog their draw steps, essentially kind of makes this in a long game or a game where you've kind of already sealed advantage, basically a counter spell. I don't know if I per se need more discard right now, but the flexibility of this card is very high. And it could be that I just want to run this over running Anguished Unmaking. The reason I'm running Anguished Unmaking is that I think what it does, it's a little bit more powerful. It's an instant speed Vindicate. And being able to deal with Planeswalkers is very good. Some decks that don't run white will tend to run like cards like Hero's Downfall if they're a little more controlling. That card is quite good against walkers. Having instant speed removal for them is good. If you're playing red, you have better options because you have like Angrass Rampage and Dreadbore, but we're not playing red right now, so Anguish Unmaking is probably one of the better answers. I guess you could also run Elder Spell, but like that card is really situational in my opinion. And Anguish Unmaking, outside of dealing with Planeswalkers, which is kind of what it's templated against in the deck, can't just deal with random artifacts like powerful artifacts, or creatures, so it just deals with a bunch. Then you have Vindicate. Vindicate, obviously sorcery speed, no life loss. The reason this card is probably a little bit better than Anguish Unmaking is because it can target lands as well. So to complement our Wasteland plan here for hitting utility lands, we have Vindicate to kind of hit stuff like Tolarian Academy or Gaia's Cradle or, opposing value lands. It could be like a Heliod's Hall of Generosity or something like that. Next we have Go for the Throat and Doomblade. These are kind of like the hallmark cards of this build of the deck because I haven't really run these cards historically. Not historically. I guess I'm still kind of just I haven't been working on this deck that long. Probably like a month and a half, 2 months. Like I've kind of been on again, off again with Esper, and I've had a variety of different builds. None of that I've really been like per se exceedingly happy with. This is kind of the first one where I'm kind of happy with where this is at. I'm running these cards, really as a hedge into the fair meta game. And the other thing is too, I was talking about the Kaya's ability the small Kaya's ability to deal with like Mana Crypt, Vault, Moxen, and Soul Ring. These cards are really good against the medium decks. The medium decks. So like one of the things you'll find in like Canadian Highlander, if you're not a common player of it, or even if you are, like a lot of the removal is really ingrown in this format, like or inbred in this format. So you have like like your Lightning Bolt, your Flame Slash, your Forked Bolt, your Fire Ice. Electrolyze, get a little old, but it's played in creature heavy metas. Arc Trail, played in creature heavy metas, or played in Blue Moon. But most of it's red, right? Like a lot of removal is red. It's kind of funny. I've been playing like some D&T recently and some Jeskai Midrange recently, and like I run Core Firewalker in those lists because like there's so much red removal in the format, and that red removal is generally pretty good because everyone's kind of in this like they're either trying to go big mana and get something huge down, or they're comboing, or they're playing like a hyper consistent like efficient deck, and that red removal really tends to be good because one, it can go to face, which does give it better range over like black base removal. But it doesn't really kill a lot of the medium threats. It's not as good against green. It's good against green in the formative stages of the game, but like if they get outside of like their first 3 turns, it's gonna lose. It doesn't scale well. Whereas like Go for the Throat or Doomblade don't ask for that much. I mean, obviously Go for the Throat doesn't kill artifacts, and Doomblade doesn't kill black creatures, but really the only black creatures you'd want to kill in this format that are turn 1 and turn 2 plays are like Deathrite Shaman and Dark Confidant. It was kind of funny. I was talking to someone about like why would you run Doomblade over a card like Cast Out. Not Cast Out. What is it? Castaway? Anyways, there's one second. I'm going to find it. Guys. Is it Cast Out? I think that's the enchantment. Yeah, it is. Cast. That's going to be too general, I think. Non-legendary. This should do it. So this is the card I was looking for. Cast Down. That's the card. Someone was asking me, like, why don't you just run Cast Down over Doomblade? And, like, I actually legitimately had to think about it, because, like, if you look on the surface of, like, Cast Down and Doomblade, like, Cast Down is probably, like, in general a better card. The funny thing is, like, not a lot of black creatures get played in this format, and the ones that do tend to be, like, 3 to 4 drop cards that are legends. Like, so you have, like, and it's funny, like, if you look over here, you have, like, Gonti, Tassiger, cards like that. Now, that said, like, there are some that this does not get. Like Gurmag Angler is decently well played. Tombstalker, I don't think that one's as commonly. Like, these are cards that are like in some decks, but they're not as common. I don't see them as much. I tend to see more like the green-based mid-range decks, like Abzan, and like there are some black creatures in that deck, but like a lot of them are smaller creatures, and generally black's a support color in those decks. Anyways, it's generally there for the selection, like the tutors and the discard effects, and or the removal. It's generally not there for the creatures. So a lot of the creatures, like I think more creatures die to Doomblade in this format, or more of the creatures that you want to kill die to Doomblade in this format than they do Cast Down, which is kind of a funny thing to say. It really is to me. And like even look like Scarab God, like this is a legend too, so Cast Down doesn't work on it. I guess Hostage Taker, but Hostage Taker's kind of tech. Like you don't see it in a ton of decks. I just think it's a strong enough value card that I wanted it for the deck. Anyways. So I am running Doomblade and Go for the Throat combined with Fatal Push. One of the things that I found jumping over to this deck from like a deck like Jeskai Midrange that you kind of lose out on is because Jeskai's running red and its red is primarily used as a removal color. It has the range to turn that burn into basically clock, which is kind of a plus. It's a boon to that deck. But I do think, when you start looking at like the medium style decks, like Jeskai can get outclassed pretty quickly. Their removal can get outclassed quickly. And sometimes they're able to use it kind of to generate a tempo win, like, double bolt, or incinerate lightning strike to face plus a couple hits off of a lightning angel or a Manus Rider, and maybe they can get there. But oftentimes I don't think if the medium red or medium green deck has its fast draw, like it's just not going to be enough because they're going to go 3 drop into 4 drop into 5 drop, and like the Jeskai deck's just going to get out tempoed by that much power that quickly. Whereas I think with cards like Go for the Throat and Doomblade, like you can just deal with a lot more. They scale better, but their range is more limited. That said, I think you still need the density and mid range of actual flexible or of good removal. So I do think that like one of the things I was kind of missing out on my builds is I just didn't have the good efficient removal that the deck really needs to kind of round itself out before, because I was kind of timorous to play cards like this because I feel like they're so specific. But given a more fair metagame, I think they're very good. Are they bad against combo? Yep, you betcha. They're god-awful. You don't want to have these cards. I mean, you don't want to have Fatal Push in your hand if you're playing against combo. Maybe you'll Mize out like a Goblin Electromancer or Baral, but in general, like these cards are just not great in those sort of matchups. So you mull them away. Or you brainstorm them away or you Jace them away. Whatever you can do to get rid of them. But you certainly don't want to see this kind of stuff against combo. Same can be said with Swords, Plowshares, and Path to Exile, but these cards are just really good. Caracas, yep, like we were talking about, there's a lot of legends in the format. There's a lot of very powerful legendary cards. And I think one of the things like that kind of took me away from like Lavinia and Cabal, other outside of being like kind of like low floor, high ceiling cards. Because a 2-3 for 3 is nothing great, and neither is a 2-2 for 2. In the right matchup, they just completely trounce folks, but that right matchup sometimes doesn't come along. Like I said, I'm playing against more fair decks online right now, and they both bounce to Caracas. So I mean, like, why assume the risk? Yeah. So Caracas is very, very powerful, and as much as possible, like if you can mitigate playing legends, you should. But sometimes you just don't because they're just that good. Wasteland, yep. I'm not playing Stripline in this deck. That's a 2-point card. Having the ability to remove lands in a deck like this just tends to be strong. You have Vindicate, Wasteland to do that. And in this deck, you're not really looking to beat them on mana capacity. Sometimes you might. You're looking to use this land removal, this land destruction, for specific effects, i.e., like take them off counter magic for a turn so you can resolve whatever's relevant, and or get rid of their power land, like Gaia's Cradle, or Tolarian Academy, or other utility lands. I guess it's not inconceivable someone could be playing a Vorash Stronghold. You don't see it as often, but it's definitely feasible. Or Yavimaya Grove or something like that. That regeneration land. I don't know. There's a lot of like different utility lands, man lands, creature lands. Sorry guys. Are good to remove, stuff like that. So. The next component here, the next pile, is the hand attack. So this is the second distinguishing thing, kind of from like the Jeskai mid-range decks, which I think tends to be like the forerunner and kind of like the kind of like the most common stomping grounds for like blue-based mid-range in the format, and probably over time proven to be the most effective strategy for blue-based mid-range. This is another thing that kind of distinguishes Esper mid-range, or Esper Deathblade here, from that style of deck, is that you have the ability to interact with the hand zone. I already covered these cards, but I have committed a point in Mind Twist in this deck, and then just basically all of the most powerful hand attack. One card that you don't see all that often that's a little more, I wouldn't say tacky, but it's just a card you don't see often in this format, is Gerard's Verdict. This card's really powerful. Obviously, it's chosen discard, but it's 2 mana. So this is essentially a mind rot for 2 mana, but you could also gain up to 6 life off of it. If you're getting 2 lands out of their hands, it probably means they don't need that land, to begin with, which is not that great. But like if you're getting 6 life like for 2 mana and taking them off of mana capacity, or at least hand size capacity, 1, it gives you a lot of information. 2, it buys you a lot of time. And 3, you're giving them less value off of their own Jace the Mind Sculptor, their own Brainstorm. Hand size is not everything, obviously, but, it does give you greater flexibility when you're using Xerox components inside these decks, to be able to get rid of relevant, or keep relevant cards and get rid of irrelevant cards. The lawyer capacity is, the more you want all of it. Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Duress, what I call the Unholy Trinity. These cards, if you're playing one of them, you tend to play all 3 of them. I don't think you per se have to. I think the one that probably vacillates the most in value is Inquisition. I don't think I tend to want to shy away from Duress or Thoughtseize because they're just that good. Inquisition is probably the weakest, but on the formative turns, I think Inquisition is just fine. If you cast this thing on turn 1, it's weird, right? Because I think I've talked to a few folks about how discard is used in Canadian Highlander. And I really think it vacillates based on matchup. It's funny, right? Because against the fastest of combo decks, you generally tend to want to save your discard for turn 2 to turn 3. It's not often that they're just going to have it all in their opener. And if they have it all, they can win on turn 1, right? The Black Lotus decks can win on turn 1 if they have it all. But oftentimes they're going to have to transmute once or twice, or transmute and then tutor to actually set up a status or a state where they're winning. So sometimes you want to save this stuff. But in other matchups, I think it's just fine to pop it off on turn 1. And if you don't have another relevant play, and your mana is to be tied up for the next 2 turns, you probably still pop it off on turn 1 to kind of screw with their establishment or their development. But Inquisition is probably, like I said, the lowest end one. It's the one that most often, if I have it in my opener, I want to pop it off on turn 1 because I don't want to miss out on high rolling out an Ancestral Recall or a Soul Ring or something like that. And it doesn't tend to scale as well either. But this is an Eternal format, and a lot of decks are kind of very curve tech, tend to stop at 4 or 5. The decks that go beyond that, don't tend to have a ton of stuff beyond that. Most of their cards are setup cards for that. So like Academy's gonna have a ton of signets. It's gonna have some fast artifact mana on that. It's gonna have some like really massive stuff. But not like a huge amount of it. Just a right amount of it. Most of it's gonna be card draw, so they can get to those huge cards, those huge threats. Anyway, jumping over to threats. So I'm playing Dark Confidant on this list. This card may look speculative to some. I think a lot of folks in this format tend to get like frightened of this card. And aggro's a deck in this format. Aggro decks are decks in this format. But Dark Confidant's like it's in a spot where like you could just trade it off, right? It's a 2/1. Like you just block with it. Like let it die in combat. If you don't want to sit around and draw cards with it and possibly harm yourself. But if you're playing against control or blue decks, like this is one of the worst things a blue deck can see if they can't deal with it on turn 2. Because like even just getting a card off of it is great. If you get 2 cards off of it, you're probably winning any blue matchup at that point. If you're playing against combo, this card is great too because you're going to have some cards that are not highly relevant, like Stoneblade, Go for the Throat, Fatal Push, Swords, all this stuff. But your life total is not going to be as relevant against them. Like some folks will say, like against Storm, like your life total is kind of relevant, and it is to an extent. Like multiples of 2 is important versus Storm, but more often than not, like you're not going to get many tendrils out against Storm. Like more often than not, like they're just going to do enough Storm that like 10 is not an issue. 12 is not an issue for them. 12 Storm count is not an issue for them to get to. Because in the standard lines, like if they get they can generally do an Iggy loop into a Yawgmoth's Will, and that's like I think easily 14 Storm count. I'd have to actually go through and do it, but like generally speaking, it's gonna be 14 Storm count if you can do both loops, or if you can do the first loop into Yawgmoth's Will. So I think the life total in like that kind of matchup tends to not be as relevant against like Academy decks. Like it's basically like you're either dead or you're not dead against Academy. So you don't really care about losing life against it. And like I said, against like the other mid-range decks or aggressive decks, you just trade this thing off if you need to. Against mid-range, I don't even really mind that much about my life total. Red-based mid-range a little bit less because they have reach. But oftentimes if like you're playing against a red-based mid-range deck, they're gonna throw red-based removal at this card. This thing's a lightning rod. And even against like red deck wins, like oftentimes this thing's a lightning rod too. They don't let it sit and play. Because I do think that if you try to let it sit and play, like it's oftentimes not going to work out in your favor. Now, if folks died to Dark Confidant, yeah, sure they have. I've seen folks draw Blightsteel Colossuses off this thing. Is great. But I think on the aggregate, this card's just worth it. Even though we are a little bit of a higher curve deck. I mean, we've got a couple 5-drops in the deck. Deathrite Shaman. Yeah, so like it's kind of cool to be able to play a green card, a ramp card in my acceleration card, let's call it, in my my Esper deck. This card's great. Like it's one of those cards that like you're happy putting out on turn 1, and like you're not really sad putting it out turn 20. Like it's still just fine then. It's a clock. It ramps you. It takes down folks off delve count. You're never going to activate it for green mana in this deck, so against Reanimator it doesn't do shit. But you have counter spells for that. You have Go for the Throat and Doomblade for that kind of stuff. Path to Exile. So as long as it's not Gristlebrand, you should be all right. If it's Gristlebrand, counter it. But yeah, this card's just great. Baleful Strix. This card is stellar too. This card is dumb. Card replaces itself, carries equipment really well, flies, and has Death Touch. So it's an invasive, trades up, replaces itself already. A 1/1 flyer. It's nuts. Just nuts. And it's made even better when you have cards like this and like this and like this in your deck. You just put it on top of it and fly over the top and kill them. Snapcaster Mage, yep. Just probably one of the best 2-drops ever printed. Soulfire Grandmaster. Someone had asked me about this card when I was showcasing this build really quick on Discord. So this card is probably at its best in a deck like Jeskai. Yeah, you could like live like the Time Walk dream and like repeat Time Walk over and over again, which is cool, but like it's not going to happen all that often. But when you have Burn, like this card actually increases a lot in value because it just makes it really hard to race you. But one thing I found with this card too is like this is again is a card kind of like Deathrite Shaman. Like you're not unhappy putting this out on turn 2. Like it'll probably trade off with removal, or it'll block something and gain you some life. Or if they're not doing anything else, it'll just start hitting them and like you'll gain some random incremental life. And then when they finally start doing something, it'll take them longer to kill you. But the cool thing with Soulfire Grandmaster is like eventually this thing is just a value engine. Like if you get a counter spell or a removal spell or even just discard, and you start basically putting it back in your hand, buying it back, giving it buyback for 4, like that's really good. Like that's really, really strong. And it's a 2-drop that does that. So it's like I think Do I think there's better 2-drops in like fighting? Yeah, but I think this card just all around kind of just does a little bit of everything whenever I want to, which I think makes it a great candidate for like just a good stuff mid-range deck because it's just, it's relevant whenever I play it. It generally tends to have some relevance whenever I play it. That's good. Bitter Blossom. So this kind of is another component of like the threat base and like how I try to build my threat base in this deck, or how I tried to. This is just really hard to kill. Like Bitter Blossom is a pain in the ass to kill. Like it takes specific things like Vindicate, like Abrupt Decay, like Assassin's Trophy. Like it takes good cards to kill Bitter Blossom. Bitter Blossom is not a fast way to kill someone. It's very slow, but it's a repetitive source of creatures. Basically, it makes creatures every turn, which tends to work out really well when you're using boots to make your things better based on a Stoneforge engine. Yeah, you're losing life off this, but again, like it generally tends to be irrelevant. Like if you need to, you can turn Bitter Blossom into Black Forest Field to just block something every turn. But in general, it fits kind of on theme with the deck. It's a very hard to kill threat, or it requires very specific answers that sometimes come at the cost of 2 for 1, i.e. Assassin's Trophy, giving you a basic. And or just eventually becomes a snowballing, overwhelming, way to win the game. Like, you get 4 to 5 of these things down, your opponent's probably dead. Aven Mind Sensor. This card just kind of hoses a lot of decks in Canadian Highlander. It's pretty hard to get around the Aven Mind Sensor. The only decks that really don't care about it are like decks like Red Deck Wins, or maybe like White Weenie with no fetch lands. Like this card just kind of does it all. I think most folks think of this card like with fetch lands, which is like probably the most common use of it. You just stifle a fetch land with it. Not stifle it, but like very, very much so limit the ability of a fetch land to find what it needs to find. But it hoses transmute effects, hoses all the actual tutors, hoses spell seekers. Just does an awful lot. Against the unfair decks, this card is great. Against the fair decks, sometimes you just flash it in, you block, and trade it off with something that's probably a little better than it. But it's a flash flyer in an equipment deck. Yeah, just great. I don't even think you need that to make Aven Mind Sensor great. It's just one of the best 3-drops in the format if you're playing white. Nimble Obstructionist, this card's also gone up a lot in my estimate. Having the ability to just have a random stifle in your deck that can also attack if you wanted to, is at flash speed and also flies. It's just epic level good. It's only enhanced by having equipment in the list. Vidilian Click, oldie but goodie. This card is good against the unfair decks, good against the fair decks. Just a really great sized body. The 3-power attacker that flies at flash speed. Card's just great. Very, very, very good card. Geist of Saint Traft. So, kind of tying back into the Bitter Blossom argument, this is just a hard threat to remove. It's not really per se like that great in attacking through like a board stall situation or like a good ground team that your opponent may have. But if you lock it up with some significant equipment, then it becomes so. And at the end of the day, it's just really hard to kill. Like if you don't attack into something like an idiot, it's very hard to kill this card, which is one of the other reasons I like it. Because with equipment, like one of the big things you have to watch out for is like these equipment are like a huge tempo sink. Like for you, like they're not good as far as tempo goes. Like if you play on a Sword of Fire and Ice, it's a 5-mana commitment, and if 2 of that mana is being used to actually lock up to a creature, like let's say it's Vidilian Click, and your opponent's got relatively open mana, or they played with open mana because they knew you were going to be doing it off of your Stoneforge Mystic, and they just spend their Swords of Plowshares or their Fatal Push or whatever and kill your Click. Like you basically just had your whole turn wasted and done nothing. So cards like Geist of Saint Traft and like to a lesser extent Bitter Blossom, but like really like the next one, True Name Nemesis, are great in that regard because you don't really have to worry about that. They're just cards that your opponent's not going to interact with, or they have to interact with the equipment directly, which requires more specific cards than creature removal. It requires stuff like Abrade, like Abrupt Decay, like Assassin's Trophy, as opposed to like a much wider plethora of cards that can deal with just creatures. But Geist of Saint Traft kind of just mitigates those cards. Like if they have Swords of Plowshares, Path Exile, Fatal Push, maybe a Go for the Throat. It just says nope. You're not dealing with my creature. Deal with the equipment. If they don't have it, then they're just going to get hit with this thing, by this thing for a lot of damage, and probably cards. True Nemesis. This card is great with equipment. I actually will showcase one game where this thing was locked up with a Batterskull, which is just stupid. It's just stupid. It's just unfair. I think I locked it up with a Batterskull and a Sword of Fire and Ice, which is great. It's just like, Jesus. Like, this is dumb. I oftentimes say this card doesn't feel like it should be a point. Like, well, I don't know. Like, I've been playing more and more with this card. Like, there's a lot of decks. Like, so a lot of the decks that I tend to gravitate towards playing don't really give a shit about True Name Nemesis. But a lot of the decks, like the fairer decks that I play against, like they really don't want to face True Knight Nemesis. Like it trounces so many folks. You have to have very specific answers for it. You have to have basically be playing Wraths, which not a lot of decks are playing Wraths anymore. The most common Wraths are like Toxic Deluge. Like you don't tend to see like Supreme Verdict or actual Wrath of God anymore. The real ways that you high roll this card is like you have Angrass Rampage, you've got Council's Judgment, you've got Liliana the Veil, Plague Engineer now, Toxic Deluge. So like there's not a ton of cards that like are templated against this card generally in a deck. You know, if you're playing against like hard control, like hard blue-white control, they're just dead. Or they're blue-white control, like this card can die very easily against them. But if you think it's like blue-red and this thing resolves, like they're fucked. Like they're not going to get rid of this thing. Like it's just going to sit there and just peck away at them until they die. Or they're going to have to race it, which, you know, blue-red doesn't tend to want to race things. They tend to want to sit back and just 1-for-1 with you and then draw a bunch of cards and eventually find their Inferno Titan and try to win. You know, or whatever they're going to draw to win. You know, Consecrated Sphinx, whatever. But this card puts you on a pretty sizable and significant clock, and it's, you know, very difficult to deal with. Restoration Angel is next up. So Resto, like, is not at its highest value in this deck, but it's still pretty good. You know, one, it's a 4-mana, 3/4 flash flyer, which is, again, great with equipment. But can also buy back some of your stuff. Like, you know, you can use it to get back a Snapcaster, which is great. You can use it to protect your threats. It also combos out quite nicely with Stoneforge Mystic to get another piece of equipment out of the equipment package. And it's also good with my other fours. So, like, Palace Jailer, Hostage Taker, it tends to be pretty good with. You know, I like it with both those cards. Next up, Palace Jailer. This card is just stupid. This card just wrecks folks. You know, there's certain matchups where it's like not great, but like if it's like the last thing you're doing against red deck wins, I think it's still fine in that matchup to cast it too. You're generally not casting it early against the aggressive decks, but against controller combo, like you just slam this thing. I mean, against combo, it's not really that great because like you really want to just be killing them. But against like control or other mid range, this card just slaps. Just really bad. Really bad. Hostage Taker, this is a card I'm trying out. I kind of, you know, have always been intrigued to try this card or play this card in more decks. I'm not convinced that it shouldn't be just a Ravenous Chupacabra. Because the floor on that card is a lot higher, I think, than this card is. Like the floor on this card is like you get to exile, like you target something and then they just remove this thing in response to your trigger. But the upside on it is really high too. Like if you take something and recast it on the same turn, very, very powerful. Especially when you start getting like ETB creatures and stuff like that. I like Hostage Taker. I think it's very powerful. I don't know if it's the right pick for the deck, but the tempo swings this card has are very big, and I like it a lot better than like something along the lines of like Sower of Temptation, because it has 3 toughness, which again, like there's a lot more cards that do 2 damage in this format, or there's a lot more removal that's templated to do 2 damage in this format than there is 3, and 3 toughness tends to be pretty good. I mean, like it doesn't pass the bolt test, don't get me wrong, there's still like Chain Lightning, you know, Lightning Bolt, but like when you start getting into like the Electrolyzes, the Forked Bolts, the Fire Ices, stuff like that, Kolgan's Command, like those kind of cards don't deal with Hostage Taker cleanly, at least. So the card is, you know, a card I'm trying out. I'm not really sure if I'm convinced on it, but it's very powerful. The other thing is this actually just deals with a wider range of cards than the Ravenous Chupacabra does, but you can kind of see that card over my maybe board right here. This deals with artifacts and or creatures, which is kind of nice because it can deal with opposing shits, can deal with opposing Batterskulls, can deal with just mana rocks, you know, again, like Crypts or Soul Rings, although by the time you're casting 4 drops in this deck, those cards probably already done their damage. But the fact that it can deal with artifacts is kind of another good sell to it to me. Here's the Ravenous Chupacabra here. Just kills a creature, 2/2 for 4. It's a good card, but I don't know if it's quite good enough for like just good stuff mid range. Maybe on less colors, maybe Golgari, I don't know. But I'm trying the Hostage Taker out. Alright, next up you have the Monastery Mentor. This deck is obviously a deck that has many spells in it. You know, so it's pretty easy to get this thing out of hand relatively quickly. I wouldn't say it's as efficient as like Jeskai is, so maybe I'm not maximizing this card as much in this build. And some of the cards are a little more situational, like the removal, like you have to have targets for it. But Monastery Mentor is just a very powerful card. This tends to snowball very easily in this deck, and I think, you know, can tend to do a very good job of winning games. The Scarab God. This is another card I'm trying. Like, so one of the other things that, like, you know, Esper kind of tends to lose out on over like Jeskai is you don't have as strong low end cards. Like Young Pyromancer is just like a great card. Like I actually considered running Hero of Pre-Saint 1 in this deck to kind of get like a semi Pyromancer effect at the low end. but I don't know. I just didn't find like I felt like I had to run like a bunch more multicolor cards that were worse than the monochromatic cards that I could run in this deck. And I didn't feel like it was worth it. So my solution to kind of like losing out on that bottom end is, one, I have removal to deal with that bottom end in like opposing mid-range decks, and two, just kind of go over the top of that stuff with stuff like Scarab God. Like Scarab God kind of goes over the top of a lot of stuff. Yes, it's a legend, so it does get bounced by Caracas, but if this thing sticks for a turn, you get an untap, it just probably wins the game. There's a lot of cards like that nowadays given, but like it's really hard to deal with this card. And it's just a real big dumb thing. Yeah. And it also deals with graveyards pretty cleanly as well, which is kind of nice. You know, it just does a little bit of everything. And I don't know, maybe it's the wrong 5-drop to be running in the deck. Maybe it should be something else. But it's a great 2-for-1 card, or maybe even more than that, if depending on how long it's around. It's great mana sink, which tends to be pretty good in these mid-range decks. And it's just a bomb. Like, it's just another thing. It's like, you must deal with this. Which is, you know, a going mantra of this deck is like, hey, you got to deal with this. Hey, you got to deal with this. You can't deal with this. All right, you're dead. All right, Creeping Tar Pit, Celestial Colonnade. Like I said, I think probably the two best creature lands. Then you have the Stoneforge package here. I'm not convinced that like I shouldn't be trying to run like maybe sort of Feast and Famine or sort of Light and Shadow. I think these would both be a meta-dependent call. I think this deck could run up to 2 swords and be fine. Like, you could run four equipment in the equipment package. I don't think you'd want to run five equipment. I think 4 would be okay, or it's doable. But, you know, probably not more than 2 swords. And I think the only reason I'm able to kind of get away with that in this deck is because the metagame that I generally tend to face is more fair. I think against more unfair decks, you want to really lean out equipment packages to like what is most relevant. That all said, I really would kind of like to. I haven't tested it yet, but I'd like to play Sword of Feast and Famine. I think main, not main. I don't have a sideboard, but like I like to play it in this deck. The ability to untap in a deck like this is actually really powerful because like you have more proactive lines you can take, and or you can just like slam something and then like attack, get an untap, and then have up counter magic. Given if you're hitting with a Sword of Feast and Famine, you're probably already winning. Like they probably couldn't deal with it, and they're probably fucked. Like being able to have counter magic up on top of that probably isn't all that relevant. It's probably not necessary. They're probably already losing unless they top deck really well, but it's still not bad. You know. So anyways, guys, that is Esper Midrange. I'm going to go over the maybe board real quick. Go over a couple of things in the maybe board that I think are decently relevant. So I already talked Kimball and Lavinia. Like, I think these cards are really good. I think in the right metagame, they're great. But like that metagame really has to be like a degenerate one to want to run these cards. Reanimate. This is a card I'm actually considering like trying out in this deck. Like, you know, I don't know how many decks are able to run value reanimates anymore. But if I'm going to be running like Go for the Throat and like Doomblade, like I think, you know, and more removal, like hard removal, like I feel like Reanimate could actually be like just a great card in this deck. Notice I'm not going to run like something like Unearth because that's only, you know, my own creatures, and like, well, I do have, you know, a lot of like, you know, 3 and under creatures. Like none of them are like really. Some of them may be worth like Unearthing, but I don't have the density of them that I think that card's going to often be relevant. Whereas like I think Reanimate could just be a very relevant card in this deck over the course of a game, whether it's early or late. Dragonlord of Jutai. Maybe this is a pet. I don't know. Like, this card just really slaps. I mean, it's a 5-mana hexproof thing that flies. Obviously, it doesn't have hexproof once it attacks, but, like, by that point, you could equip it with, like, your Sword of Fire and Ice or your Jit or something like that. And realistically, it doesn't die out all that much. Like, there's not a ton that does 4 damage at instant speed. There's War Leader's Helix. There's, like, Jeskai Charm. I don't think Jeskai Charm's all that played, but, I mean, you know, there's not a ton that deals 4 at instant speed. I mean, I guess there's like Psyblast and like Blue-Green, Tempo, Sorensen, and then there's like Char, but I don't even know if Char sees that much play anymore in instant speed. So yeah, there's not a ton of instant speed 4 damage removal. I mean, you know, there's Swords of Plowshare's Path to Exile. That's, you know, pretty common, but otherwise, this thing gets totally outside of Fatal Push range. So, I don't know. This card's interesting to me just mostly from the standpoint that it has hexproof when it's relevant for it to have hexproof to lock up equipment to it. And it's just kind of like a big dumb 5-drop that buys itself back if it gets to attack once. Teferi, this is a more realistic 5-drop. Now this card's more controlling, but like, it's funny, right? Like, so Teferi, I had this weird like cube. It's kind of, I'm gonna tie back to a cube story. So, I had like a Death and Taxes list basically in cube that was able to splash blue for Geist of Saint Traft, and it had I think 2 to 3 fetch lands plus a Tundra and a Hallowed Fountain. And I ended up having a Teferi in that list. Like I had a sideboard Teferi, and I was like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna try running Teferi." And like the card was actually really good in Death and Taxes. I was like, "Man, this card's actually pretty good." Like I mean, it's just good in general, but it was actually pretty good in that list because it was really great to be able to like be beating them down. They cast a big bomb, I drop a Teferi and bounce their big bomb, or put their big bomb three from the top, and then just attack and win. Or like I attack. They wrath my board. I drop a Teferi, and they're like, "What the fuck just happened to me?" Because like they figured they were going to win at that point because they just wrath my board, and then I drop a Teferi and start turning on the card engine. In the way they had sideboarded their deck, they weren't set up to deal with it or something like that. Like this card is really good, and I think it's fine in mid-range as well as control. It's really a controlling card more so, but I think you could play it mid-range to be fine. And I don't know, I may test it at some point. It's just another big dumb 5-drop for the deck. Yeah. That's it. Like I'm still kind of high on the Scarab God right now, testing the Scarab God right now because it's just a card that like just wins games. Like it's a little bit more value if you get untapped than like a Jutai. It's a little less resilient than a Jutai initially, but if you untap with this thing, like oof, it's just so much value. And it's just a big thing. All right, next up, we have Kaya's Guile. This is a card I just want to test. I don't really think I need this card in the deck, but I kind of just want to test with it and see like how much it impresses me. It's very flexible. The fact that it can deal with the graveyard is kind of nice against the unfair stuff. It just does a little bit of everything. I'm just not sure if it does enough of everything for the right mana cost. If this was 2 mana, I think it'd be a great card. But if 3 mana, I don't know if I'm quite sold on it. But I'll test it at some point. Council's Judgment. This is a card also I'm not sure if I should be running or not. The fact that it just deals with everything, it's untargeted. Removal for anything, basically, any permanent, any non-land permanent, is really, really powerful. That all said, like, I don't know. Maybe I should be. But, the fact that Vindicate can deal with lands is kind of one of the big sells on it. And then the fact that Anguish Unmaking is an instant speed card is also another big sell on it to me. Council Judgment being sorcery speed is actually a bigger cost than you might think. And I don't know if every deck that can run it wants to run it. Yeah. Alright, so Hero Precinct 1. This is a card I just kind of wanted to test with. I did for a bit. I just wasn't impressed by it. I really think you need to have like 20-plus multicolored cards to really make this thing run. And even then, it's certainly no Young Pyromancer. Like, Young Pyromancer works off a plethora of really good 1 to 3 mana cards. Hero Precinct 1 works off a plethora of good 3 to 5 mana cards. So it's a big difference, right? Like, you're not going to get as much equity out of that. Disenchant. So, like, I think, this is a card like more and more. Like I kind of want to start running in more lists that just run white. Like Disenchant is very good. It's a very powerful card, and I see more and more like problematic enchantments, artifacts running around that like I just want to be able to deal with, and this card just does that. It's honestly very flexible removal, and while it seems very specified, like in this format, it deals with the shit that people don't expect you to be able to deal with, which is kind of a thing that is good. It's a thing you kind of like to have. It's a little sneaky. It's kind of a sneakier looking card, but like I do think it's underrated. I do think it's underplayed in the format, and I wouldn't mind finding space for it. The only problem I have with it in a deck like this and like a mid-range deck is like it's It can be dead. It can be a dead card. That all said, like I do think that it deals with enough that like you could run it and be just fine. Esper Charm. This is another card I kind of want to give a shot to at some point, but I don't know if I need this density of discard or more than the density of discard that I currently have. But yeah, this is a very powerful card. It just does a lot of everything. Again, it may just be 1 mana too much for the effect, but it's 1 mana too much for any one of the effects. But maybe in its aggregate, it's good enough. Gonti, yeah, this is just a card that like I kind of want to just run because it's kind of like a better Baleful Strix. It's more mana, so it's a worse Baleful Strix in general. I think it's a lower card quality than Baleful Strix, but the effect of this card is very powerful. You don't really get that on a ton of other cards. So Gonti is very powerful. I mean, yeah, it's a legend, but no one wants to bounce this thing. It trades off very favorably, and it just gets you another free card. Ravenous Troop, already talked this. Then Custody Lich. This card is bugged on MTGO. If this card was not bugged, I think I would run it over Scarab God. I think it's just more of a high impact card when it hits the table over a card like Scarab God. But unfortunately, this card is bugged. It's broke like a joke on Moto, so I'm not running it in the main deck because I just I don't want to run a broken card. And if you're not familiar with how this card is broken on Moto, it's not painfully obvious the first time you use it because it actually works the way it should until the Monarchy changes hands. So the way Custodial Lich is broke on Moto is you cast this thing, you become the Monarch, they sacrifice a creature. If they steal the Monarchy, then the Custodial Lich stacks again, it triggers again, and forces you to put a sacrifice trigger on the stack. You can either target yourself or target them, but it shouldn't do that, right? Like, it should do that again if you retake the Monarchy. You should get another sack trigger. But yeah. So it should not do that. It's broken. It's not very fair. You could run it. It's actually better the way it's broken. It's a very favorable bug if you're the one that owns the Custodial Lich or has a Custodial Lich in play, but it's not good for obviously playing the game the way it's intended to be played. So anyways, guys, that is Esper, with all things considered, kind of in the maybe board here and some of the things I'm thinking about in the deck. It was kind of a tougher deck for me to build because I kind of had to like step away from like running more technology and just running more just good stuff. Like, to me, it's kind of boring to run just good stuff, but I think it's kind of what makes this style of deck tick. Is this deck going to really excel at killing anything or at any one given thing? Nope. But it's going to have a good game against everything. It's going to be a good 60-40 deck, most of the time. Is it, the best blue-based mid-range deck in the format? No, it's probably still Jeskai. But I'm willing to say that like Esper does kind of attack a metagame from a different angle, right? It has the ability to interact in the hand zone, and then it has removal that is far more scalable, despite giving that up and having worse range, i.e. it does not clock people out, doesn't actually hit the life total. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back for some gameplay here momentarily. Alrighty, guys, back for our first game here against Noah. This is my first game I play with this deck, and I'm like, this hand's not great, but I'm on the draw. I've got a Spell Snare, I've got a Preordain, I've got a Dig Through Time. This hand could really be anything. The fact that I have 2 fetch lands actually kind of ties together for me because, like, 1, I'm going to have good mana, and 2, like, it's going to fuel up my Dig Through Time. I have a Snare to interact, Preordain to find whatever I may need to find based on whatever matchup it is. Like, this hand could really be anything. So I keep it, in the dark, even though it doesn't really do any one given thing per se very well. Opponent plays out a turn 1 Blightkeeper, and I'm like, alright, well, we're playing against a very aggressive deck. I think this is the Grey Weenie list that I've played against him before. Or when he's played it before against me. Plays an Una's Prowler here. I'm going to go ahead and just get this with Snare, just because I can. Like, I think it just makes sense to use my mana efficiently here and trade my cards off. Draw to a pretty decent one here. There's an argument to actually playing out the Seachrome Coast this turn. I kind of opted, the reason being is because like I'll probably want to Priz Vista if I want to set up the Dig Through Time on the following turn. But realistically, the reason I'm playing it this way is because I just want to get Dig Through Time online. The downside to playing it this way is that I already have the Tundra in hand, so I have to fetch for a land that shocks me here to be able to cast, to be able to have double blue on the following turn. Unless I want to play the Seachrome on the following turn. But I go ahead and just fetch here so I can fuel up my yard. Ponder. See some cards I like, actually. I actually have a Ponder that's pretty nice. Get to have this Force of Negation. They're probably just going to recast the Soltari Champion here, which is fine. I can't really do much about it now unless I find like a Force of Will or a Daze. But I fueled up my graveyard to 6 cards here, which is pretty nice. I'm sorry, I kind of misexplained that. So the reason I couldn't play Seachrome Coast on turn 3 is because I had to fetch with Prismatic Vista in order to get 6 cards in my yard to actually Dig Through Time. So Kaya is a card I knew about. I find True Name Nemesis off the top. True Name Nemesis is good, but really not, an all-star right now. What I have to do is actually play out Kaya just to develop because it's 4 mana and I'd like to get her developed on the board. I go ahead and take 2 more damage, but exile their basically 3 power attacker. So I take 1 less damage off of it, but it'll be back next turn. They go ahead and attack me as opposed to attacking my Kaya, play out their hand, basically, Leonin Arbiter and Mother of Runes to get back their Soltari Champion. So now I'm kind of in a spot where like I realistically really need to find a way to deal with the board. They've kind of already showcased that like they're most interested in just killing me. They can't kill me with an all-on attack this turn, although they're going to have basically 6 power. Well, yeah, not more than 6 power. It's 5, 7, 9 power. So they have a lethal attack. So I incentivize their attack here with Mother of Runes. They go ahead and actually attack with Mother of Runes. If they don't attack with Mother of Runes, it's not lethal, right? The reason this is favorable is because I'm able to eat the Mother of Runes, then leave up Doomblade to deal with the Soltari Champion, which is unblockable because it has Shadow. And they attack it to me for some reason anyways. I figure maybe they have a I don't know, a Toxic Deluge or something. I don't know. I go ahead and gain life here, so I'm just out of range, and I'm also able to play the Bitter Blossom out. Even though I'm at 6, Bitter Blossom's actually going to be just good enough to I'm still going to close the game out fast enough where, life lost for 2 turns is not really going to matter all that much. Maybe I shouldn't have played it out, but my thinking was this. If they play out a threat, like a flying threat, they're probably not going to block. They're probably just going to take the Restoration Angel beat down. But Bitter Blossom will enable me to block it without having to use Anguish Unmaking. And, worst comes to worst, I can just Anguish Unmaking my own Bitter Blossom before I die to it. So, yeah, they cast a Spiteful Armageddon out here, but then go ahead and pack it in because they're just dead. If they blow up all the lands, they don't have anything on board. We're probably going to win this one. So, kind of good stuffed them out. It was actually a pretty tight game. It was interesting from the standpoint that they were kind of incentivized to actually attack with their Mother of Runes due to Soltari Champion Pump. That would have been an Xaxes 9, but due to the fact that we had the Restoration Angel and we're kind of able to upset their combat, they did not have the removal to deal with the Restoration Angel. We eat their Mother of Runes, go into a pretty powerful. Kind of mount a very powerful comeback by playing out the True Name Nemesis and then leaving up Go for the Throat with Force Negation backup and onboard Kaya to keep on kind of building some card advantage and at this point basically just making sure I don't die. Anyways, guys, quick pause and I'll be back momentarily for game number 2 against Noah here. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Again, this hand just kind of does a little bit of everything. It's good against creatures. They play out a Duress and a Mox tapped land. Duress my Thoughtseize, which is fine. I like my top. My top's actually pretty nice. I've got Land Geist Soulfire. It's pretty good for this matchup, at least I think. The Geist is not very easy to interact with, although we're not really looking to be the aggressor in this matchup. And the Soulfire is a card that's going to be more difficult to race, especially if they have a card that can't block. They go ahead and Turbo Geddon, so they blow up 2 of my lands and blow up 3 of their own. But now, I still have lands in hand, so they kind of get into a little bit early here. I think they really need to develop a bigger threat base out. The fact that I had that 3rd land on top is now looking great. Vampire Interloper does not race Soulfire Grandmaster. Unfortunately for them. Kind of at a point now where all of the cards in my hand are great, but I just kind of want to hit more mana. So I think what I opt to do here is play out the Baleful Strix. I think I actually should have floated blue here just in case Okay. I guess hindsight's 2020. I actually forgotten this happened. I should have probably... Actually, I couldn't float blue, could I? No, I couldn't have floated blue here. So anyways, I left up the Swords of Plowshares. It didn't matter. You couldn't float blue. You can't float blue with Fetid Heath. But I think if I had the option to float blue, I would have much rather done it. We get him for lethal here with the Geist. Kind of too early of a Ravages there. I think Ravages is a powerful card. And I think in general against most blue-based decks, that would kind of generally be a game ender. But my deck, while being, a blue-based deck is not a control deck. It's very mid-range. It's got threats of its own. They're going to tend to outclass the aggressive threats. So I think for in the case of this game, their keep didn't really have the pressure to kind of put on me, and we were just able to kind of go over the top of them here, and we had the lands to kind of recover. Vampire Interloper doesn't really race a lifelinking threat for starters, and then the Ravages ploy didn't kind of work out for them. I do think in general it's going to tend to work out better for them than it is for us, depending on what we have in our hand. And I think at that point they knew we had 2 lands left. We had more of a mana-rich draw, land-heavy draw, which I think is fine in mid-range decks to keep 3 and 4 land hands because you're going to generally tend to top deck better than other decks. You can just have all bombs. Which is part of the strategy. As long as you can cast them, they're good. But here, I don't know if I like the early Geddon. I think how they really have to win this one is they have to get 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, 4 drop out, and then look to Ravages afterwards. Before we can establish board parity or even in this case board advantage. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for the next game. All right, guys, we're back. Playing against Noah again here. This hand is not great, but it's acceptable, and here's the reason why. I have a turn 1 fetch land, so I can fuel up. Basically, I can turn a Logic down into a Force Spike for turn 2. They play out a Scattered Groves, which makes me think possibly mid-range or control. Scattered Groves is a slow land. It's an interesting land, right? You don't tend to see those the more aggressive colors cycling lands all that often. You tend to see the cycling lands in like more controlling decks. So I logic not the Kasali Pride Mage here, just because like right now, like I am in a spot where like I kind of want to like force spike that thing, wasteland them, and then demonic tutor for probably a Stoneforge Mystic, which is what I do. Yeah, that makes sense. They have no plays, which is kind of like what I want to set up there. I go ahead and play out the Adarkar Waste, play out the Stoneforge Mystic, and then I'm able to leave up Spell Snare here and go and get, I believe, my Batterskull. Yeah, just get a threat. And even if they're able to deal with the Stoneforge Mystic, like I have my 4th land drop, so I'm not, exceedingly far off from a 5th if I have to hardcast the Skull. And I have a backup Monastery Mentor. It appears they're out of lands, so it was more than likely that they were going to try to Eldamri's Call for like a card that finds mana or makes mana, like a mana dork possibly. They Selesnya Charm here to make it 2/2, which is just fine by me. They make the attack here, but I assume that I'm probably pretty safe to actually block this attacker with the Batterskull because I have Counterspell up. The most likely sequence is they either pump this thing to kill the Germ token or they follow up with a Reclamation Sage, which is what they do. Reclamation Sage is a great card, but Counterspell gets it. And now we have 5 power on board, 4 of which is lifelinking against what appears to be like a mid-rangey aggressive deck. Pretty much Selesnya based, but it could be running black. I don't know yet. They play on a Prowling Serpapard. I just go ahead and Tainted Pact here. I don't really care about this Serpapard, but I want a Tainted Pact so I can get up to 6 cards in my graveyard so I can then dig through time. I'm not going to counter this thing, though. Actually, you can't counter this thing. You can exile it with the Spellcaller. So go ahead and dig through time here. I believe end up finding... Swords of Plowshares, Cryptic Command. Just find the 2 best cards. The rest of it was land, actually, which is not great. Find another land, which is fine. I just plow this thing. Just get it out of the way so I can use my Cryptic Command on a creature if I need to. They play on a Brightling. That's really not something that's worth Cryptic Commanding. So unless they have like Swords to Plowshares, which I don't think is likely they have because they probably would have killed the Stoneforge Mystic earlier. So they would have had to draw into it. And they've been drawing to lands. So I don't think they have drawn that card. I think it's pretty safe here to tap out to Resto on their EOT to get the Sword of Fire and Ice. Go ahead and attack here. That's going to be 7 damage, unblockable, essentially because they have a 5 power flying attacker that will do 2 upon triggering of the sword hitting them. And then the Batterskull is just something you don't really want to block. I mean, they can block it and then bounce the Brightling, and like they're staying alive, but and their creature's going to still be around, but they're going to be recasting, and it's just not a winning position there, I don't think. So anyways, they go ahead and pack in this first game here. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for game number 2 against this Selesnya mid-range deck. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Yeah, that hand was kind of awkward, actually, because it just had it had the ability to get Brainstorm locked very easily. I like this hand a little bit better. I'm not going to go to 5 off of it. I get very lucky here, so quick pause. Yeah, so my opponent had a stellar draw, right? Like it was very all in on this Burmaz, it appears, because they're playing a turn 2 mana dork, and they have 4 mana in play. But they had Mox into Burmaz, which is very powerful. I mean, it's basically a 4 power attacker on the next turn. It's turn 1. I get very lucky myself, drawn to a Caracas off the top ropes, and am able to bounce it here, which is very powerful. They can recast it here, but it's not that big of a deal. They play a Luxodon Smiter out, so they did have a follow-up, which is good. I think if I'm in their shoes, I'm probably more incentivized to play the Luxodon Smiter out first. I guess maybe not. Like, Luxodon Smiter scales a little better. Yeah, Luxodon Smiter scales better. So I'm going to hit for 7 here. Like, I still might be dead. Like, they probably have a removal spell in hand, and then like Bremaz is my best guess at this point in the game. They play on an Imposing Sovereign. I just go ahead and Vendilion click here, targeting myself, I believe, getting rid of the Inquisition. I can Inquisition the Bremaz, but like that card's not that great. Trade off with the Fyndhorn Elves here. They go ahead and Blossoming Defense, which to me, honestly, I think they may have wanted to just trade there and like do more damage to me. I get very lucky here, so I save the Brainstorm basically until the last minute when it has to be relevant. Find the Toxic Deluge I need. If I didn't find Toxic Deluge there, I just lose the game here. So double Mox Darts are very powerful. We get very lucky on Caracas, then we get very lucky off of Brainstorm, having the ability to Wrath their board with the only Wrath I'm playing. They play on a Gideon ally of Zendikar. I go ahead and bounce their Burmaz. Draw into another great draw in the deck, which is Batterskull. Batterskull is normally not that great to hardcast. Normally you don't want to use it that way. It's not intended to be used that way in this deck, but in fair matchups, like you have time for this kind of stuff, and it's good. Like, Batterskull is great. Drawing a land there was actually really good because we're going to be able to lock up the Batterskull and still leave up Caracas at this point. Batterskull with True Nemesis is just absurd in fair matchups. They're hellbent, so like basically their live draws, like they need to draw artifact removal in order to race this. They draw another legend. I go ahead and bounce the legend, the Thalia, Heretic Athar. Play on the Stoneforge Mystic. The reason I bounced the Thalia there is because I'd rather have the Stoneforge Mystic as a blocker. I just cast out Gideon the Trials here, just target one of the random Knight allies, so it can't do damage. In case I try to do some sort of, crazy all-out attack. It's not going to do much, but a crazy all-out attack would not do that much. It would just, be a flunge. Draw into a Doomblade. I show off and cast it. Again, like, Doomblade in this metagame has not been bad for me. Like, I just, Doomblades and Go for the Throats have been just fine. Honestly, in some cases, like, they're better. Like, there's less removal in the Jeskai deck that deals with Brimaz than there is in this deck, right? Like 4 toughness things, 5 toughness things, etc. We just get him here with the True Nemesis. True Nemesis and Batterskull is just if you've never beheld that sort of value, it's great. But yeah, so this is an interesting match. This is an interesting game. I don't think in general I would win this game. Double mock start on the play. Versus the hand that I opened with was pretty strong. Got lucky, drew into the Caracas, which was like the first like huge stroke of luck. Best card in my deck to draw, Caracas. And then, even then, like, we were pretty handily out-tempoed by their early mana advantage. But, I think at least played to our outs by how we used the Brainstorm here. I mean, we waited on the Brainstorm until the very last minute, until we knew exactly all of the information that we needed to know about what we had to deal with, and found exactly what we needed to find, which is the T-Del. Toxic Deluge was able to wipe their board, and then even on top of that, we kind of got lucky with the Batterskull top deck. I mean, that was a very good draw. With a land to follow it up so we could lock it up and still have Caracas active. Like, basically, like, everything came up millhouse for us in this game. I don't think in general we would tend to win against this draw that my opponent had, but we did get there nonetheless. And then again, kind of showcases the power of, like, the mid-range decks, too, is like, you just play bombs, and if you just play bombs, you'll just draw bombs, right? Or you'll draw land sometimes, or, possibly not the right bomb. But we drew the right bombs at the right time in this game. But that even aside, like, I mean, these cards are good. I mean, there's not really a high synergy deck. It's just play good shit and put equipment on it and win. Like, that's it. Very, very simple. Play it well and it'll do well, and, generally speaking, it'll top deck well. Anyways, guys, sorry, Noah, kind of a bad beat, man. But on the whole, kind of got to showcase, like, one of the hallmarks of mid-range is that it just can top deck like a champion sometimes. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for some more gameplay with Esper mid-range. Alright, guys, we are back. This hand's fine. I don't know what I'm playing. I'm playing against Maximilian Pegasus here. He tends to play, like, more wonky combo decks. I see a Mutavault. That could be anything. No clue what's going on. I'm going to leave up the Mana Leak here. I'm going to save the Thoughtseize because, like I said, sometimes he's on wonky combo decks. I do Mana Leak the Torpor Orb. I don't really think I have to Mana Leak the Torpor Orb. I mean, I do have some good ETB creatures, but my thing is, like, I don't really plan on countering on the following turn. I'm going to cast out the Nimble Obstructionist against them because I need to get a clock going. So I think it's just worth using it there. I mean, it may be relevant later. I draw to Force of Negation, and I'm like, this is kind of a little bit rough. At this point, I think it just makes sense to get a Kaya down, or Kaya. I could Thoughtseize them, but, like, I'd rather knock a card out of their hand and draw a card here. Again, I think the value on cards like Thoughtseize goes up over time a lot in this format, a lot more than folks would think. Now, I finally Thoughtseize them here and see their hand. Their hand is like all powerful 4-drops, so it's an artifact-based strategy, it looks like, an artifact-based prison deck. They have Trading Post, Hedron Archive, Ubamask, Orbs of Warding, and God Pharaoh's Statue. They're on prison. The first card they're going to cast is going to be this Hedron Archive, which more than likely I'll just counter for value, basically not for value, for tempo, so I can have this 6 power that I have on board kind of do enough to kill them. Ubamask is a good lock piece against more blue-based control decks. Against a mid-range deck, it can be decent. If you're not familiar with Ubamask, what it does is basically any card you ever draw gets exiled, and you can just play the card from exile on this turn, on the turn you're on. So the cards that go to exile don't stay there forever for you to use. So basically, Ubamask is very good against blue decks because like if you exile a Force of Will, like one, it's not in the hand zone, so you can't use the alternate cost, and two, like counter spells in exile like that you can only cast on your turn are pretty bad. It's less detrimental against like a mid-range deck that's like playing Scarab Gods and like stuff like that, Gideons, whatnot. But it's still going to be worse for us probably than it is for our opponent, who's probably a mostly artifact based permanent deck. So it's kind of an interesting lock piece. Hydron Archive is just mana and or card draw, which is probably what they're going to play first if they do get to their fourth land. Trading Post is kind of like a value engine. It can block, it can draw cards, it can return artifacts, it does a little bit of everything. But it's a lot of mana and it's kind of dirtily. Orbs of Warding. Not really using a ton of targeted effects outside the discard in this deck. I mean, I guess I just use the Thoughtseize. So there's some, but Orbs of Warding doesn't really do a ton against this deck. It just turns off my discard and reduces some damage off my creature beats. God Pharaoh's Gift is a ways off, but this card just makes everything cost a lot more to cast, and it eventually kills your opponent very, very, very slowly. So anyways, like my opponent's hand is very kind of cumbersome. And I'm going to punish that as much as possible with kind of how I played this. Just get value a little bit every turn. So I've gotten a card with Kaya. I'm going to get another card with Kaya next turn because I exiled her with herself to go back up to 5. Get the Kaya back. Go ahead and hammer their hand. This Inquisition's pretty bad. I'm just going to go ahead and leave up the Swords to Plowshares here in case like they try to animate their Mutavault and hit my Kaya, I guess. They play on a Karn and they're just like, nope, I'm just dead. What's going to happen here is I'll activate the Critter Land, the Creeping Tar Pit, fly over the token they make with Karn, and then use Kaya's -1. Each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life to do exactly 8 to them. So just they got clocked out. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for the next game against this artifact-based prison strategy. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Yeah, this hand's keepable, but it needs to hit lands pretty badly. They go turn 1 Ancient Tomb into Grim Monolith, into Mana Vault, into Hydron Archive, into Sensei Stivening Top. So they have mana. I go ahead and Thoughtseize them right away. Like I said, sometimes Thoughtseize increases in value over time. Against what they just did, it does not. You want to get, so they assumably kept this hand based on a payoff. Mindslaver was a payoff. Was it that relevant right now? Probably not. But they don't really have a lot going on. The Wasteland's disconcerting because I did keep a land light hand. But I've got a Serum Visions. Maybe I can find a land with it. Is kind of my thinking. And then if I find a blue source, possibly I can set up the Dig Through Time. Palace Jailer, not a great draw. Just want lands. I think Moto is misremembering what happened here. Could I not cast that Serum Visions? Interesting. I don't know why I didn't cast it. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. There's a Sphere of Resistance in place. This is a prison deck, right? So there's a Sphere of Resistance. I could not cast the Serum Visions. So I use Serum Visions, find a Spellseeker off of it, and put 2 lands on top of my deck. I do find 2 lands, which is nice. It's a pretty good big pickup. And it's funny because I can only cast 2 spells in my hand, one of which I don't think is going to be relevant in this matchup. That is the Go for the Throat. And the second one is Gerard's Verdict. There's now a Mana Web in play, so let me kind of stop this for a second, kind of splice down this game state. This is a really bizarre game state. So basically, my opponent has this Clock of Omens. Clock of Omens says tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, untap another target artifact, which is pretty relevant with Sensei's Divining Top. They have 2 Hydron Archives, which can draw cards. So they basically have 4 cards that are displayed on board, even though they have a 0-card hand. And they have this card called Mana Web. This card is fucking annoying as hell on Moto, on MTGO. I don't think the card's overpowered. It's just the way it's templated, it's an old card, so it was templated before these cards had to be implemented digitally. This thing stacks every single time you tap a land, which is really just annoying. But basically, at the end of the day, what Mana Web says is if you tap a land that produces a color of mana that any other land can produce, you have to tap all the other lands that can produce that color. So, for instance, if I tap the island, then I have to tap the Creeping Tar Pit. If I tap the Scrub Land, then I have to tap the Creeping Tar Pit. Whereas if I tap the island, I don't have to tap the Scrub Land because it doesn't produce blue. And if I tap the Scrub Land, I don't have to tap the literal island because it doesn't produce black. But the Creeping Tar Pit does. So basically, it means that like you can't counterspell. It means you can't play a spell and then counter a spell, or you have to have pitch counter magic to do it, or you can't, generally speaking, play multiple spells in a turn or over the course of like 2 main phases. Like you have to do everything at once. Is kind of what Mana Web means. It's an awkward card to play around, and on Moto, because it stacks like infinite goddamn times, it's really a pain in the ass to play with. So I make a really interesting tech play here. I can only do one of two things this turn, and one of them I just can't do, which is go for the throat, and I don't think it's ever going to be relevant. So what I actually opt to do is Gerard's Verdict myself to actually set up Dig Through Time later on in the game. Because of what I'm playing against, I think Go for the Throat is just a worthless card, and like Toxic Deluge really isn't doing much either. So I think getting rid of them and going up to 7 cards in my bin is actually more relevant here, because it's going to allow me to use Dig Through Time to find relevant cards to try to win this game. They have a Jeweled Amulet, not that relevant. This Sensei's Dividing Top is just replacing itself every turn. But I have this Vendilion Click, which is nice. So another kind of weird card in play, Crystal Ball. It's a 3-mana artifact, pay 1, scry 2. It's actually pretty powerful, but it's really clunky. I don't know if it's powerful. But it's good value. It's just, I don't know. It's a weird card. I've seen it played in Commander. I don't know if it's playable in this format. It's fine. I don't know. I don't know if I'm high on Crystal Ball. It's a cool card. I don't know. Anyways, Sensei's Dividing Top is now on top of their deck. They're going to draw it during their draw phase. I really want to get rid of top. So they have resoundingly won the mana fight. Like, I'm never going to beat them on mana. Things are only going to get worse for me over time the more cards they can see. So I think the best way for me to win this is to actually, during their draw step, get rid of the Sensei's Dividing Top so that they're trying to find a threat with just Crystal Ball. Crystal Ball is more clunky. It doesn't allow them to draw. Instantly, they're going to have to start popping Hedron Archives if they want to drop or draw on the turn they find something with Crystal Ball. Otherwise, they're going to have to use Crystal Ball and then like draw it the next turn, is kind of my thinking. Moto may be having an issue here, guys. It may be having a moment. Alright, there we go. Alright, so I play out the Vendilion Click, get rid of that. They find a Gilded Lotus, which Gilded Lotus is 100% fine. It's just mana. Like, they already have mana. Like, I don't care about them having more mana. I can't stop their mana at this point. The mana situation is done and gone. I can't fight it. So I get a clock on them here. Alright, come on, Moto. Okay. I'm going to push play again. So they find an answer. They find Contagion Clasp. Contagion Clasp really isn't a big deal, though. I actually find a land here, which is relevant because I need to cast these spells. Alright. Oof. Moto's having a tough time dealing with these cards. Alright, this is not what happened. Alright, guys. Unfortunately, Moto is misremembering this game now. So what ends up happening here is I cast out a Geist of St. Traft. They use the Clock of Omens to double use the Crystal Ball here. They don't find what they need. I get to hit them with Geist of St. Traft, putting them down to 2. Actually, what they find is they find a Orbs of Warding. So I get to hit them down to 4 with Geist of St. Traft because it reduces the damage from the Angel by 1 and the Geist by 1. So basically just doing 4 damage. Of note, it's not possible to use creature lands outside of using like artifact mana in the face of Mana Web. So Mana Web, because it's lands that produce the same mana, all tap at the same time, basically. If I tap this island, I have to tap the Creeping Tar Pit because Creeping Tar Pit requires blue mana and its activation cost. It's not possible to actually fire it up on the same turn with Geist of St. Traft. So what ends up happening is I attack them, put them down to 4. They do basically, I think, 8 scries. They can do up to 8 scries with Clock of Omens over the next 2 turn cycles. Possibly actually more at this point. But they see a lot of cards, just don't find a way to either answer the Geist or win the game, and I end up just getting them with Geist of St. Traft. Just ends up winning me the game. So anyways, guys, I'm going to go on a quick pause, and I'll come back for one more game with Esper Midrange. Sorry this replay broke, but this is a very kind of convoluted, complex game with a lot of different intricate cards that have weird stacks, and I think it tends to screw up Moto. So anyways, probably not going to get that replay to work. Just broke. Alright, guys, back momentarily. Alright, guys, back. Playing against Mox again. Yeah, his hand's fine. I don't know if they're playing the same deck, so I keep his hand in the dark. I get to rest here. They take the Toxic Deluge, which means, okay, they're playing a creature-based strategy, I assume. Play a Wasteland and do nothing. I just go ahead and run out Baleful Strix. I kind of just do it as a test spell. I want to see if they have a counter spell. I'm not going to just throw Stoneforge into open blue mana here. Now they have the Force of Will. So they had Force of Will as a counter, but they are now short a dig through time, I want to say. Beat them down for 1. Cool. Still have the Spell Snare available if they try to cast a 2-drop. They attempt to cast a 2-drop. I just, trade. Spell Snare would have traded for that card anyways, but I figured the information's worth more. Just go ahead and drop a Palace Jailer here on an open board. It's pretty good. Start drawing cards. Draw a Geist. They finally find a land. I believe I just go ahead and drop this Bomb Scarab guy. I just run the bomb train on him. Just all aboard. They go ahead and pack it in there. I mean, yeah, if they have like Toxic Deluge, I guess they can deal with it, but it doesn't really matter if they have Toxic Deluge. They're going to take 3 here down to 14, take 5 off of their own Toxic Deluge on to 9, and then I'm going to play a Geist Saint Traff with a Thoughtseize backup and a Active Monarchy, and they've missed too many land drops. They're kind of out of this one. That's just how Canadian Highlander goes. It's a very snowbally format. If you get behind, generally tends to be tough, especially in like these kind of matchups, like these kind of like these blue matchups, mid-range versus what I assume is probably aggro control or mid-range. Pretty tough to come back from behind. Anyways, guys, quick pause. Be back momentarily. Alrighty, guys, back. Yeah, hand looks fine. I mean, it's a little bit clunky. It's got 2 3s, but it's got a 3 that deals with a bunch of threats. And it's got a 3 that deals with something specific, and then it's got a good 4. So the hand's not great, but I think it's acceptable. And then I see this, and I'm like, oh, I'm probably going to die. This thing's going to draw a lot of cards. It's going to draw 2 cards for him, my opponent. The one good thing about the decks that run stuff like Ninja of the Deep Shadow or Deep Hours is that honestly they can see a lot of cards, but their card quality tends to be a little bit lower. I just vindicate this thing right away. Search for Escanta is a bigger long-term problem, but my thinking is this: if they're a deck that's playing stuff like Mausoleum Wanderer and Ninja of the Deep Hours reliably, that means they have a lot of cards that are not really that great on their own. I assume they probably have some number of Flying Men and stuff like that in order to make cards like Ninja of the Deep Hours work. So I kind of feel like the value of this card is probably a little bit lower. Not to mention, this card will eventually beat me. This card's beating me right now, so I'm going to blow this thing up. I have a couple options here. I know my spells I assume my spell will get countered, so I don't want to play Teferi out. What I do here is just play out the Hostage Taker to force them to counter it. They do. But next turn I can cast out the Teferi and be proactive with it and have Memory Lapse back up. Or I can do what I do, which is just play out the Toxic Deluge here. They show me a Mana Leak. I go ahead and Memory Lapse the Mana Leak to force them to use their Mausoleum Wanderer, which is pretty low value, but they end up having a Spell Snare anyways. You get to save all of their threats and have built up their graveyard to a pretty sizable volume at this point. It's a lot of counter spells out of their hand. So, kind of hoping at this point that maybe I've gotten most of them out of there, and there's still a turn or two away from flipping this search. I go ahead and look at their hand. They have another counter spell, which is very good. I go ahead and play out the Hostage Taker here after trading the Thoughtseize for the counter spell. I think they probably should have just let me Thoughtseize there. Maybe I don't know what their last card is. Maybe it actually is the card they draw here, which is very good. I think they draw this next card. I think it's Ancestral. No. It's Spellseeker. Spellseeker's what they drew. I'm pretty sure they drew that, but I don't know that. So, kind of out of the frying pan into the fire here. I think I was in a good spot until that Ancestral hit. They dismember their own Terramander here. Get the Teferi down. Just go ahead and bounce the 1/1 because I want to draw a card. Go ahead and duress them. Get the Flusterstorm out of their hand, which is kind of another interesting card to see in a deck. You don't see it that often. It's definitely a very good card against combo decks, but its range is a little bit more limited. They find a Hymn to Turek, which is just a beating, because I actually had, I think, a really good shot of turning this game. Hymn to Turek was one of the better answers for what was going on there. I would have rather seen a counter spell, because then, I'm just trading 1 for 1. But, my deck kind of does what it does and finds some bombs here. Get a Serum Visions into a Liliana. I'm able to remove the Mausoleum Wanderer. I'm not convinced now that, maybe I shouldn't have just killed the Seeker here. But I was kind of afraid of getting, ninjutsu'd out by the Flyer. They go ahead and Cryptic Command their own card, which is not good for me because it means they're probably going to find something else really good out of their deck. With the Ancestral gone, I don't think that card's as spooky, the Seeker, but it's still not great. What did they end up finding here? So they drew Jace for the turn, more than likely. They got Reanimate. They got Reanimate to get the Terramander back, which is going to be size massive. So I make an interesting play here. Like I think this is the most game-winning line. What I end up opting to do is this. I pop my Teferi to push the. I'm sorry, I pop the Teferi to push the Hostage Taker back to my hand. Now I do this on the gambit that like it be the best draw in my deck is to draw a untapped land. If I draw an untapped land here, what I can end up doing is this. I can actually use Mind Twist to Mind Twist away their last card, which is very viably a trapped counter spell that Teferi's been kind of trapping in there, and then recast the Hostage Taker to steal the Terramander, and not recast the Terramander. Actually, maybe I should have done that line anyways. Maybe I should have just stolen it and not recast it, because then they can just bounce it with Jace. Whereas in this line, they can't. Anyways, yeah, no, I probably could have played this better. I probably could have just done the Mind Twist line to get the last card of their hand, and then played out the Hostage Taker to steal the Terramander and not put the Terramander back into play. Yeah, that was probably the highest upside play. I think either way I look at it, like their draw out here was really good. We got Seekered into him, into Jace the Mind Sculptor, into Rebuy Seeker, which into Liliana here, which is just it's a good game. We're dead because we're gonna die to our own Bitter Blossom here, so I go ahead and let the thing tick me down to no life. I do think we could have, like, despite our opponent having some pretty good luck in this game, I think some pretty good draw steps, which I'm certainly not against. It's good. I do think we could have played this better and possibly still won it. The Liliana probably would have been tough to beat though, on top of the Jace, on top of the recall. But yeah, if we had Mind Twisted as opposed to playing out, I mean, it doesn't matter if we play the tap line. If we just Mind Twisted to get the last card, and then just Hostage Taker to keep this Terramander underneath the Hostage Taker, maybe we could have found a line to win. I don't know. It's tight. I don't think we probably would have, because I mean they still have Escanta, plus they have the two walkers going, neither of which are particularly easy to beat. So yeah, tough beats. I think in this game, it's like any format. If you draw the right half of your deck, which I think like these blue-black decks tend to have right and wrong halves of their deck, they're going to do better. And if you draw the wrong half, it's going to be rugged. So I think that's one of the benefits you get when you're playing like a mid-range deck like the one I'm playing right here is like, yeah, I do have some cards that are a little more situational, but in general, like the overall card quality is going to be pretty consistent. So I'm not going to have stuff like, Flying Men in my deck, next to like Jace the Mind Sculptors and Liliana, the Last Hope. The value of their cards is significantly different. Or like Ninja of the Deep Hours. Like Ninja of the Deep Hours is really great if you have like, a Terramander or a Mausoleum Wanderer on the board, but it kind of requires those cards to be on the board in order to make itself good. So like less of my cards I think are situationally good, I guess is what I'm saying. So it's kind of like one of the benefits you get when you're running a mid-range deck. But when things work out and you draw like the right parts at the right time, decks that have higher synergy, will tend to be good in situations like this where like they just kind of have these synergies and are able to get incremental advantage out of them to a point where like they put you in a position where they win the game. That all said, there were good top decks on the other side of the board, and that's just sometimes it's tough to beat. So you get what you got here. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for the next game. All right, guys. Game number 3. This hand's acceptable. It's a little slow. I'm going to play on Drowned Catacombs first. I would rather have been able to suspend the Ancestral Vision turn 1. Opponent makes an interesting play here. They actually take the Gideon, which means to me that they probably have... I don't know. They probably have a faster hand? I don't know. I think in general you want to take Ancestral Vision there because it's just something that you're going to have to interact with, and it's a lot of cards later on down the road. Plus my hand had threats in it, so I don't know. Interesting line to me. I'm going to leave up the Spell Queller here. They play on a Hymn to Turek. I play out a Spell Queller to exile the Hymn to Turek. They Force of Will. So basically it's kind of a two-sided Hymn to Turek. I mean, they get... Actually, we both trade the same amount of cards. So I'm kind of fine with that. I did mulligan in this one, so I'm a little bit shy on cards. I believe I bottom 2 lands, do top a land, or do receive a land from the draw off of Serum Visions. They go ahead and Treasure Cruise here, play on a Bitter Blossom. Bitter Blossom's can be a spooky card for a lot of blue decks, but I'm not really your stereotypical blue deck. I'm more of a mid-range build. I find a Jace here, go ahead and play out my land and have a Batter Skull on top. They play out a fetch land here, tap out to find a Dig Through Time. I think at this point,
So this is like kind of one of the problems you run into, right? I'm going to pause it real quick. It's one of the problems you run into with like the blue black builds like this, like the decks that like use Delve, that use like the ninjutsu cards that were in this deck. A lot of the cards have like less singular power. So like you can see my opponents like drawn a ton of cards. Like they've treasure cruised. They've seen a lot of cards. I mean, they're at 77 in deck, and I'm at 87. So the volume of cards they've seen is vastly superior. But the relevance of it, and you have cards like Notion Thief, which Notion Thief is a like very powerful card, but it's a very niche card. It's a very niche card. Same with Yukikuro the Tiger. Like this card is very powerful. It's a very, very good card, but you really need to have something like a Bitter Blossom going, or something like that. Whereas like a card like Resto Angel is just a big. It can be just a dumb 3/4, or it can be a high upside card. It's good either way, really. Anyways, I guess my point is like they've seen a lot of cards, but because their cards kind of have variable quality depending on what else they have available to them, and also based upon what matchup they're in, like I don't think in this matchup it tends to matter that much. It matters which cards they've seen. To me. So yeah, despite being basically behind 10 cards or having seen 10 less cards, I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot here. I get pretty lucky here, and I hit the Mind Twist, which is a great hit because they're tapped out. They've already spent their Force of Will. So it's basically Daze, Force of Negation, or Bust. They don't have it, evidently. They're going to discard 5 cards here on the following turn. I'm going to have access to either a Batterskull or a Restoration Angel with an active Jace. I do bounce their token there because I guess I probably didn't have to. No, I think it is a smart call to bounce it because I mean, if they here's the way I lose this game is if like I don't bounce their token and they play a ninjutsu card drawer out, or like a ninjutsu card that like hits my hand, or a ninjutsu card that just kills my Jace. So I do think it makes sense to bounce the token there to set up this Mind Twist. But if they top deck well, they could still just blow out the Jace, and then like I'm kind of back to having like a good hand, but like not per se a hand that like automatically wins the game. I think if I do this play, like it's very hard for them to win because they're not going to have direct damage to kill Jace. So anyways, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. This has been Esper Midrange. I've been pretty happy with this rendition of the deck. I've worked on a few different builds of it, but I think this is the route that I've kind of enjoyed the most as far as like the gameplay and like kind of like just my visceral, my gut feeling about like where this build, like where this color pie is a mid-range build kind of needs to be. I feel like I'm pretty comfortable with where I'm at right now. Could it be teched out a little bit more depending on like the metagame? Of course, like I think any deck could be, especially mid-range, but I do think I have a pretty good compilation of the good stuff for Esper, and I kind of feel like I have the right ratios of the effects that I think this deck needs to have in order to have a pretty good 60-40 plan. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the deck tech and gameplay. I'm going to go ahead and cut it there. Take care and enjoy.